We're up. We're live. Kevin Burch, welcome back. Welcome back. Anyone who hasn't heard from Kevin, it's fantastic to have you. I love our chats. Should be called the Kevin Alex Show. Darren's like, should we have Kev on again? I'm like, yeah, put him in, whatever you want. We'll always find something to talk about. So anyone who hasn't met you or doesn't know you can skip back a few podcasts and listen to, you're like one of the first ones on. So
episode 3, I think, and then another
Anyone
one.
Who wants to know more about
Kev,
episode 3, and then we're not going to repeat that stuff. We're going to get straight into the conversation about the book, The Boy Crisis. And we have some funny stories about this, because I have it that I thought you'd read the book, told me it was great and I should read it. I read it, then went, this book's brilliant. And then you went, I haven't read it yet. And you read it and went, oh.
Well,
which is why this podcast is going to be so epic, because it's not going to go how I thought it was going to go, which makes it even more fun.
Yeah, so obviously you've got two boys. Yeah.
That story.
Well, you've got 2 young boys, and we were speaking about this. It must have been because my son is 2 months old yesterday, and my wife's in hospital for like a couple. So it must have been at least 3 or 4 months that we had this conversation. And I said, I've just heard about this book. Someone on Twitter I respect recommended it. Someone who does a lot about male psychology in the UK, one of the leaders in that area, and he recommended this book, and I bought it. And I said, you might, we were talking about the challenges of raising boys today. And I said, you might like that then. So you got it, devoured it. I was, dealing with a wife in hospital, having a brand new baby, etc., etc. So, hey, I've been doing some reading, but not too much. And then it's like, we've got this podcast, we want to work the book. So I've read it in the last 2 days. And it's quite a big book, right?
It's a big book.
But there's a lot of its references. I mean, there's a huge chunk at the end that's, references and, the types.
And I will say, anyone who gets the audio version, I mean, I like listening. I'm quite quick. So I started listening to it, and I have to say I nearly lost the will to live until I realized I could speed up the voice and put it at 1.5 speed. And then I could listen to it and get into it. So it's a big book. Hey, Vanessa. Vanessa said morning on YouTube. So it's a big book. It's a big audio book. It's a lot to get through for anyone, thinking about reading it. And I still recommend reading it.
It's also a bit.
Even though you're now skeptical.
Well, no, it's also a bit wordy and it's a bit repetitive, right? Now, Warren, so the 2 authors, Warren Farrell and John Gray. John Gray of Mars, Venus fame, author of what I would say is the most famous personal development book in human history ever, which is Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, right? Yeah. But he's only written the section on ADHD. That's clear. So all the rest is basically Warren Farrell's book. And Warren Farrell was involved in the feminist movement in the late 60s, early 70s. He was the only man to be elected 3 times onto the National Organization of Women, I think it was called in America, along with top feminists, Gloria Steinem, people that you've heard of. And so, that's his kind of background and context where he's coming from. And I suppose personal development, is this a personal development book? Probably not really, because it's going into lots of things to do with public policy. So there's, the kind of books that I tend to most be into these days are personal development, right? Here's the issue, boom, 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 boom. Here are solutions. Here's steps you can take. Very pragmatic, and often quite short, therefore, right? Whereas if you were to go back to the 70s, books would be like really long and lots of words and no pictures or diagrams, and there wasn't Netflix. Obviously, the attention economy was very different. So it feels a bit like a throwback to that, and a bit sort of very sort of concerned with public policy. I think one of the things that we're always dealing with as parents is thinking about how we want to raise our kids, how we want to set our kids up for the best, and then also thinking about, well, what's best for kids in general and society in general. And they're not necessarily exactly, there's overlap, they're not necessarily exactly the same, because my kids aren't average. They're not going to be average. Obviously, by definition, most kids have average lives, right? That's the way humanity works. But when you're talking about financial freedom, you're not talking about something that most people are ever going to achieve. So if you go, well, there are things we can talk about how to help people financially be more organised and budget and stuff like that, which applies to pretty much everybody. But then you're really interested in like, well, hang on, we want to go to another level to that. And that's certainly how I am around parenting as well. So part of this is a bit sort of, I don't want the boy crisis, as he's talking about it, to like expand and become worse with, as one of the things he talks about is how a lot of the jobs that uneducated men or not particularly academic men have done traditionally will become automated, whereas a lot of the jobs that uneducated or not particularly academic women have done traditionally will not become automated. So there's going to be this kind of, even more perhaps than there is now, a male underclass essentially, who are going to struggle to get work, struggle to, already struggling at school, struggle to get work, and struggle to get a woman, struggle to get a wife, struggle to raise a family, struggle to keep a woman married to them, because being employed is particularly not very attractive to women, having an unemployed husband, etc. So I get that there's social issues there, and the knock-on effects obviously can affect all of us. But then we're also, if you think about the classic thing of how we've got a circle of control, things in our lives that we can control and make a difference in, and then we've got a circle of concern, which is much bigger, which is things we're concerned about, but which we can't do anything about. Now, the more time we spend on our circle of concern, so stuff we care about, we're worried about, we're upset about, but we can't actually do anything about, the more miserable and frustrated we feel, right? It's a basic kind of psychological distinction. So you're much better off focusing on the zone of control. And of course, once you get into public policy and politics, which is kind of where you start to go into, you're very into the zone of concern and stuff. Being upset about who won the election or what the Supreme Court did, or Brexit or Trump or whatever, is a kind of, many people will have some degree of it, but it's kind of a waste of energy, because you're talking about something that you personally can make so little difference to. It's really outside your control almost entirely, and yet if you spend your time focused on that, you're gonna make yourself miserable and stressed. Whereas when you can say, what can I do on the home front to actually make a difference in my family and in my local community, then you're going to make more difference, and B, you're going to feel much more empowered and have a richer experience of life.
And then, so yes, I agree. And what comes up for me is a question around, that's fine. I've been having conversations with people lately about, so Peter from Stole Coffee, who's been on this podcast, and he rides a bike, right? He has a coffee business where he rides a cargo bike and sells coffee. The reason I'm sharing that is he drives on the roads with this bike and he has a problem with the potholes. Okay, this sounds completely non-relevant to this.
I get the principle, yeah.
You know where I'm going, right? So actually, if he doesn't, and what he said to me was, these potholes are a problem. Not quite like that. We were talking about it. It's a problem. Someone needs to do something. And I was like, well, maybe we need to do something about it. Maybe the council is insufficient and they spend money just before the end of the budget. No one really takes it on as a passion project. So they just find the easiest thing to spend the money on before the end of the financial year. So they get the money again next year. Nothing wrong, unworkable, but nothing wrong with it. So maybe if we got involved as a community and said, hi, could you spend the money in these potholes, please? That would really make a difference. We could work with the council and have the world transformed. And for me, it's kind of like that with parenting. Like, I completely agree with you about there's stuff that if I start worrying, Jesus, if I watch too much about the war in Ukraine and what's happening in politics and what Boris is up to and all of that stuff, I could spend myself exactly being ineffective. And there's a point to which if we all just go, I can't deal with that, we get what we're getting, right? In politics and in big business and all the things that are happening. So where's the, and in schools, you and I have talked about.
There's a balance, right? So there's a balance. Absolutely. I agree. And I have been, my daughter's 19, as you know, and I have had one-to-one meetings and or written letters to the head teacher or the head of the governors at all of her schools at various issues over the time. I don't step back and just go, oh, well, that's the way the school is, can't do anything about it. If there are issues, I will take it up. So that is me engaging with the wider community, not really because it's going to affect her. It's like the wider community. So And again, the potball thing is kind of local-ish. And of course, some people will get involved in national politics and make a big difference. That does happen. But for every one of those, there's many millions who are getting really, really upset and not making any difference at all, basically. It's a bit like sport, right? You have this kind of survivorship bias where you look at the greatest athletes of their generation, you look at Rafael Nadal or Federer or Ronaldo or whatever, and you go, wow, they did this, this, and this. Therefore, if I want success, I'm going to replicate this, this, and this. And it's like, well, yeah, and that's great. And 99.99% of the people who do that will not make a living at sport, let alone get anywhere close to them. So it can be inspiring, and it can be, but it's like you've got to strike a balance. And in fact, that's one of the conversations he talks about in the book, is how going for the sort of the balance between following your dreams and your passion, your inspiration as a man, and doing what you really, really want to do. Bearing in mind that if that is to be an artist or a rock star, the odds are really stacked against you. Versus going, well, actually, I'll just get a job that I'm not really that bothered about, that I can, put bread on the table. So that's the similar, thing he does talk about. And how do we balance that? And well, I've got some thoughts on that as well. But I think what I'm saying is that he's it's not really a personal development book. It's a public policy book, kind of. But there are some practical solutions, but not in a very not in a very bullet point punchy way. So I found that a little bit frustrating. Lots of words.
Yeah. And so let's see.
Well, maybe is there a boy crisis, Alex? Is there a boy crisis? Because he's very interestingly, and I was really quite shocked about this, about the stats of how parents perceive it. And parents, large majorities of parents, if you ask them, would you rather have a boy or a girl? They say, a girl, I'd rather have a girl.
I was quite shocked by that. I was really surprised by that.
Even adoption, when people are adopting, there was some statistic about money. When it comes to adopting, people end up spending more money adopting girls than boys. Like, they're more keen on getting girls to adopt than boys. That really surprised me. Obviously, this is not what would be going on in China, right? It's the opposite way around, right? So it books very about America. It talks a lot about school shootings and Marines and various military stuff in America. There's quite a lot of American context to it, which is fine. But in the Western world, there seems to be a preference for girls, and there is a perception amongst mothers and fathers that girls have it easier. Like, it's easier to raise a girl, that the world is kind of set up for girls more in a way. That's what parents seem to be saying. Now, of course, if you look in the wider media, including lots of journalist articles written by people who aren't parents, they'll tell you that everything's set up against girls and it's all patriarchy and it's all unfair on girls, all this kind of stuff. And maybe that had worked 50 years ago, but not now. And that's when it goes into the stats about the suicide and the educational underattainment, etc.
And isn't this the pendulum? For me, how it occurs to me is it's the pendulum swing, right?
Yes,
so we've been saying for a long time it's set up against women, patriarchy, all of this stuff. And now the pendulum's swinging the other way. And actually what we're seeing now is the outcome of that, of making, effectively, in short version, men wrong, being masculine wrong, doing manly things wrong, like shouldn't do any of that, can't do that, it's not allowed. If you're a heterosexual white male, you shouldn't exist and you should feel guilty about everything that every white male has ever done, all of that world. And now, what was interesting when I read that in the book, I thought, wow, really? Because my perception, and I've got two boys, and I actually had I've got friends who really wanted a boy or a girl or one of each, and they were really clear. And I was like, I don't have a preference. I'm happy with, whatever I'm given, whatever is created, however you want to word it. And what I actually think about when people go, oh, I'd much rather have a girl, it's easier. What actually comes up for me is, well, is it? Because those girls have to deal with the guys that are being brought up in a world where we have a boy crisis. So those girls are going to have a hell of a fucking time with the men that they're with really struggling.
Right. So that's again one of the things that comes, which is kind of obvious to anyone if you think about it for a second.
Sure.
Thinking about whether it's good for men or good for women about anything is dumb because they're inextricably linked, right? Because if you think, well, this is really good for men, good for women, but it's bad for men, then it's bloody bad for women as well, isn't it? Or it's good for men and bad for women, it's bad for women as men as well, because you're gonna, even if you're growing up, you're a lesbian and all your family are women, and you never plan to have children, so you're never going to have a son. You still have a stake in how men are doing, because it shapes half a bloody society, right? So anything that's good for one sex and not the other is bad for both, basically. So that's a fundamental, and that sounds so obvious when you put it like that, but that's something which a lot of our opinion formers seem to have forgotten, not think about. And what was it you said at the beginning that I was going to pick up on with that? Yes, the education, so the focus on the pendulum, right? So it says 63 in the book. In an audio I listened to him more recently yesterday, it's 70. The top 70 industrialized countries in the world, the most industrialized countries in the world, girls are outperforming boys in education in every single one. Yeah, every single one, right? And so when I hear things going on, when I hear Michelle Obama's founding some foundation about girls' education, all that kind of stuff, I'm like, Michelle, if you're doing it in some of the poorer countries of the world, if you're doing it in Afghanistan or whatever, maybe there's a great point. But if you're doing it in if you're doing it in the US or Europe, you're on the wrong side of the flipping seesaw still, right? And I think a really good way of putting it, which I think was in the book, he said, for a long time, girls did worse than boys in education, and we said there's something wrong with the schools. And now boys do worse than girls in education, and we say, oh, there's something wrong with the boys. Yeah. Now, what the fuck is that about? That is bullshit. Now, the feminization of education, the lack of male teachers, etc., is a big problem. Now, what he doesn't, he talks about, when he talks about the causes of the boy group. So, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, he's saying, boys are struggling academically across those 70 nations, clearly. The suicide rates are off the charts, different comparisons, and they diverge, right? So when, they before the age of 10 or whatever, boys and girls commit suicide at the same rate, then boys take off and increases hugely, which you could say is, is that to do with their testosterone, is that to do with them, or is it to do with how society treats them, a bit of both, whatever. And then those rates diverge more greatly over time. And they're getting worse. So the rate of male suicide is growing much, much faster than the rate of female suicide. So there's definitely something not working there. And then you also talked about, what could be the causes for these sort of educational and self-esteem type crises. And one of them is, men being run down in the media, the kind of stuff we're talking about, the kind of negative, toxic masculinity, and, how you can just
patriarchy like it's a bad thing. And
you can see Super Bowl ads all about, there was one you talked about where halftime of the Super Bowl, there's three very affluent women, it's like split screen with three very affluent women, and one of them's giving birth in her birthing suite or whatever, and she goes, oh, sorry, it's a boy. And it's like a boy is disappointment, and it's like, if you're a young boy seeing that, fuck, what are you going to think about yourself? It's very easy to grow up thinking, it would be very easy to grow up thinking, oh my God, the fact that I'm a boy means that there's something wrong with me. And
can you imagine if that advert said, oh, it's a girl? Can you imagine the outcry?
Yeah. So obviously with all these things, when you just flip it around and go, let's imagine it was the other way around, and go, oh yeah, that would be outrageous. But it's all about punching up rather than punching down. And in fact, he talks about when he was involved in the feminist movement in the early 70s, the where it became he kind of had a bit of a falling out, or there was a split, because when it came to parenthood, he wanted what was best for the children, right? The guiding light for marriage, couples, relationships, when there's kids involved, should be, I think most of us probably see, well, let's think about, it's important what's best for the adults, what's best for the kids. And so he saw that men being involved was really important. Dads being involved was super important. But the feminist movement was like, well, we want to empower women, and we don't want to say that you're right, but we don't want to say it because we'll lose members. People will go. We want to campaign for women to have, strong divorce laws, women to get the custody of the kids. This is America, remember, women to be able to move to another state with their new partner if they want to, and that the dad not be able to stop them, that kind of stuff. And he was like, no, that's not good. That's not right. And they were like, yeah, but we can't say that because it would lose us members, which is a fucking tragedy in itself, right? And a great insight into how organizations, whether it's big multinational corporations or whether it's campaigning organizations, political organizations, take on a life of their own and just want to grow and grow and keep the money rolling in and have more and more influence. And then the truth and what's right
doesn't matter.
Fall by the wayside, right? So we had a bit of a parting of the ways with them over that. So the causes, the denigration of men and negative messages. We all know that adverts on TV, when there's guys, the father tends to be shown as incompetent or a figure of fun. If there's going to be a joke, made, it's never the woman in the partnership who's the butt of the joke. It's the man. That's almost universal in advertising. It's also true in sitcoms and
it starts with Peppa the Pig. It starts young. It's not when kids are older, and it's not even funny at any age if it's only on one. It starts in Peppa Pig, where they constantly take the mick out of Daddy Pig. So they never say anything to Mummy Pig.
Yes, this comes back to...
She works hard. She does stuff at home. She does firefighting. She's amazing. She fixes all the problem. Daddy Pig, well, he's fat. He's overweight. He's unfit. He's a bit dumb. Crazy.
Yeah, and this is when we're coming on to how you've got to curate what your kids watch. You've got to curate what your kids watch. And this is one of the things where I'm like, well, my kid's not going to struggle with this stuff because my kid ain't going to be watching that shit, right? My daughter hasn't watched that shit. My son won't be watching that shit. But if you just give a kid a smartphone and access to Netflix when they're, free access to Netflix when they're 3 or 4 on a tablet, and a smartphone when they're 8, good luck. And of course, that is what a lot of parents are doing, not all, but a lot. So yes, causes. So symptoms, signs of the boy crisis are the suicide, the lack of educational achievement, and higher unemployment, and that's going to get worse as those jobs, the jobs that are based on strength, physical strength, and a willingness to do something that's dirty and risky. So whether that's being in the army or being a firefighter or cleaning out the drains or oil rigs, shit like that. Those jobs are the ones that AI will tend to take over because they don't involve, because they're dangerous and dirty and horrible. It's good to get AI to do, or robots, whatever. But also because they don't involve a need for empathy and those kind of human qualities, where we have a massive edge over AI for quite a long time to come. So the more caring jobs, also got an aging population in the Western world. So caring jobs and jobs that require empathy and human contact and warmth, which would tend to be things that women have done and which historically women are better at in general. Those jobs are not disappearing. So you say one of the solutions is to train boys more into those sorts of areas and to have them see that's a noble and positive thing to be doing, and to help them raise their emotional intelligence, teach them emotional intelligence at school so that they can be more empathetic. Because he provided an example, interestingly, of how classically boys aren't as good at reading the emotions of another person as girls are, same men and women, so empathy. But when you pay them, when you give them a financial incentive, the boys do just as well as the girls. so when you speak to their values and what they care about,
you can't say that, Kevin. You can't say that.
I'll say what I said wrong.
You think something serious?
They can do it, but if you just ask them to do it for the sake of understanding and being empathetic, they're not as motivated, right? So they can learn it, but so he's saying train them. So these are the and then the feminism, depends what stage that you want to talk about, but I'm glad that my mother and my daughter and my wife have more opportunities than they would have had 100 years ago, right? Than their great grandmothers had. I'm certainly glad for that. And then it's like the pendulum swings too far. So now you've got women out earning men. So the whole gender pay gap thing, as we talked about before, is basically bullshit. It's not
just
true.
Nonsense. Well,
the Professor Claudia Goldin at Harvard, who is basically the US, probably the world's authority on the gender pay gap, and a woman would say about 2% of it is about discrimination. So yeah, it's because like for every dollar a man earns, a woman earns 76 cents. 2 cents of that 24 is discrimination. The other 22 cents is choices and preferences.
Choice, yeah.
But actually, when you go, but really, it's a parent earning gap. It's a mother versus father, because before that, in their 30s, women are out earning men per hour. We're talking about per hour, of course.
Yeah.
And actually, people in their 50s who haven't got any kids, women are out earning men as well. But what happens is when they become parents, and as I think I mentioned to you before, some people go, "Oh, that's the motherhood penalty." It's like, oh God, yeah. Well, you could look at that if you want to be a victim about everything, or you could say, well, actually, mothers make different choices. Mothers are more likely to say, "I want to stay at home with the kids more." My wife is a doctor, right? So and she's not a bloody, she's not a that's a pretty high achieving profession, is the point, highly educated.
Yeah,
and she's in there breastfeeding my son in her nest of the bed and the cot and everything in the room. And she's happy as Larry. And she's going, this is so much less stressful than being a doctor. And it's so much more rewarding than being a doctor. And, if I said to her, actually, honey, once 6 months are up, I want you to go back to work full time and I'll be a stay-at-home husband, she would fucking freak, man. She wouldn't want to do that. Right. And I wouldn't want to do it. It's like, so basically she's going to make different choices, and already has actually, because always been part-time since 10 years I've known her, than many male doctors. Women are going to make different priorities once they become mothers, certainly. Oh, that's because of the patriarchy, that's because the home's set up wrong, that's because people need to get in there into people's marriages and change the way they relate to each other. Well, good luck with that. It's basically that men and women make different choices. So what you've then got, though, is outside of parenthood, you've got more highly educated or better educated women doing better at school. The universities are something like 60-40 girls over boys now, whereas 50 years ago it was the other way around. And then the women also have this kind of higher emotional intelligence, and they're like, well, hang on, I'm with this guy, and we're married, if we get that far, and we've got kids, and I'm earning more money than him, or I'm better educated than him, and I'm more emotionally intelligent than him. Maybe I'll just, I'll upgrade, or I'll actually, fuck it, I can do it on my own, or I'll let the government look after me if I'm at a lower income level, which obviously there's a huge issue with that, and that, there is a kind of alternative options, and divorce has got so easy, and people got less committed to marriage. So these are and then the kids are brought up fatherless, which has huge problems, and becomes a self-perpetuating cycle, because then those kids, those boys in particular, are going to do worse next generation, and so it snowballs. So that's what he's saying are the symptoms and the causes of it. So a lack of male purpose, because they'll kind of like just be a warrior and just go deep sea fishing, all that kind of stuff isn't there as much as it was, and it will become less and less. And then you've got the denigration of men in the media, etc. And this is what's crushing boys, is his thesis.
And so it's interesting, because we were speaking just before we came on, and obviously prior to this. So one of the things I found really interesting, and I'm conflicted about it, was he was talking about, and there was a lot of language in there about how do we make it okay in society for men to start doing traditionally women's jobs, so teaching, caring, being a stay-at-home dad, which, I know you were like, you had quite a visceral reaction, like, oh God, I just couldn't do that, right? And I will, it was interesting. So I read the book and I was like, this is a really important conversation. It's not nailing it per se, because it's kind of like saying, oh, well, men can just be women and then everyone will be fine. In a very short version, it's much better than that. But if you had to kind of really condense it down, it's kind of saying, it's all right, guys, you be women's roles and everything will be fine. And part of me was like, okay, I kind of get that. And from my first marriage, that we had this conversation of, I was working, I was chefing, which is a very masculine job. And the minute I thought about having kids, I was like, I don't want to be a chef if I'm having kids. Back to what you just said, right? That choice of, I'm not going to have a kid and then go back to work. Like, fuck off. It's not going to happen. But that whole thing of, but how do you do it? How do you manage it? there's an element to which, I mean, you know, David, my ex-husband, right? He's a great dad. He's such a great guy and would actually almost thrive in that environment. So in theory, that would have worked. But in actual, so when I'm reading the book, I'm going, but actually in practice, the thought of that to me as a woman was really ick, to use a very non-descriptive word. It was visceral. It wasn't, there's nothing intellectual about it.
So you had the same reaction. You had the same reaction as me then?
Yes, actually, when I look, intellectually, I really want to like that idea. Intellectually, I really want it to be okay that, you know, as when we can, and I mean, I work, right? I've got a 2 and a 4-year-old at the end of July. I've worked the whole way through. I have a nanny. We've got 4 sets of grandparents that help out regularly. And guess what? I work from home. I work from 9 till 2. I have lunch with everyone.
4 days a week.
4 days a week as well. And I do some work in the evenings when the kids are in bed. So I'm around a lot. So although I work and I'm building a business, if I had to go out to work or go back to work when I'd had my kids, I wouldn't have done it. I'd have gone, no, it's not happening. I'll stay at home. The fact that I have a business that I love and I'm financially free, so I know what I want to do and I'm doing the business because I love it, meant I could carry on, because actually it makes me a better mum, ironically, having something else that's interesting other than being with the kids 24/7. I'd be a terrible mum if I was with the kids 24/7. I would hate my life. I would hate my children. But the idea of going physically back to work within, let's say, 6 months. I mean, I was back in the office with Sarah, my PA, when Charlie was 2 weeks old. We have a photo of him asleep, you know, in a crib while we're working. But he was there. I was at home. We went to have lunch. So yes, I was back in work, but not like most people have to go back to work after having a baby.
Yeah, so you had a similar reaction to me then. So I think that
which is interesting,
he does, because when I was, because obviously we haven't really talked about this offline, right? When I was thinking about this conversation, I wanted to ask you that, because that was going to be my what's your, because I know your, you know, know some of your history and your experience, right? We talked about it before, and I was going to say, well, what's it like with your husband? What's it like with you? And you just answered that. So he talks about, you know, the sort of the hero stay-at-home dad kind of thing. I can't really call it, some sort of, you know, make it sound heroic and masculine, and meeting that, you know, bonding or pairing with the have-it-all mum, the mum that wants to have kids and have a career and all this kind of stuff. And of course that could work, but that's going to be really rare, because it's like the dad is gonna, you know, be nurtured. He's got his story about when he met John Lennon and didn't realise it was John Lennon and all that kind of stuff, which is, you know, kind of funny in a way. But John Lennon had been in one of his parenting groups, men's groups, rather than saying, oh yeah, with my second son, who was being born at that point, I stayed at home with him and it's been really amazing, all this kind of stuff. So he talks about the dad's doing that, but it's all like, and the mothers are off being in the corporate world 24, you know, working the long out. It's like that role, it's like, do you think the mothers are going to be happy with that? It's like talking about, it'd be really nurturing. The guys are going to feel more connected and human when they can be more involved as dads. Yes. But if then the women are like, you know, disconnected as mothers, that's not going to be sustainable, right? Now, you are not a stay-at-home mum. I mean, you are or you aren't, because the ways you just described. I also, for the last 19 years, have been a much more at-home involved dad than many. The idea of being in the corporate world, you know, being away from home regularly. You know, people I have clients where they go on business trips all over the world, and this stuff, they're away from their kids. Or being a lawyer in the city and working 80 hours a week, you know.
Even a trade, you know, even in the building trade, like any kind of role where you have to leave the house at 7 a.m. and you get home at 7 p.m. I mean, it's any kind of job where it takes you away from the home, right? It's not even just corporate.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I haven't been that, and I wouldn't have been that. And, you know, I split up with my daughter's mum when she was 4 years old. So it was even more important to me. You know, I didn't just have my daughter every other weekend. I had her every week during the week as well, for at least one night a week. And that was really important to me, because then it's not just like this weekend holiday dad thing. It's like involved taking them to school, picking them up from school, going to all the school trips, and being in the playground, talking to the other parents, etc. So, you know, I was there at 3 o'clock or 3:15, whatever, every day to pick her up. So, I have made different choices to someone who was a lawyer, for example. A lawyer probably couldn't do it, although they could go part-time, it happens, but it would be different. So, in some ways, I'm on board with that, right? So I think having more raising emotionally intelligent sons, flipping fantastic. I think that's really important. I think that's kind of one of the key things in parenting. One of the big picture, kind of like the most important thing is as a parent to become more emotionally intelligent, to work on yourself, to read about psychology, to understand yourself, to maybe have counsel or therapy, or go and do courses like Landmark Forum or something like that. Go do DeMartini course. Understanding yourself better, understanding how humans work, understanding what motivates us to act and what really drives us, those sorts of things, the difference between the conscious and the unconscious, how humans develop. All that's so important because you understand more about yourself, and then as you're more sort of calm and conscious and self-aware, the whole environment you create for your children is so much more calm and conscious and nurturing, and you can teach them in a way you don't take things personally. The kid gets upset, I hate you, daddy, and my daughter would say, it's teen at 12, whatever, I hate you, and I'd go, I hate you more, because I never took it seriously. Because kids are supposed to say to their parents, I hate you. It doesn't fucking mean they really hate you, does it? Right? Whereas I had a client very recently talking about his parents, that when he would, he's been struggling a lot. He's in his late teens and he's got some serious issues I'm helping him with. And he said to me, when I try to open up to my parents about my problems and everything, they just kind of go, oh, how do you think that makes us feel? How do you think it makes me feel when you're saying that? So the kid can't express himself because the parents then go, well, I think it makes me feel you're saying that. And they take it really personally, right? So the more you can not do that shit as a parent and just, go, okay, the kid hates me and they say that, but they don't really mean it. They're just a child. It's part of being a teenager, etc. Not the better you are as a parent. So the whole kind of emotional intelligence thing, which men don't do as well as overall as women, obviously, there's some truth to that, is absolutely that's a key foundational thing. And again, I'm going to raise an emotionally intelligent boy. It's kind of like a given. So for me, like, okay, that's really obvious. But yes, not all young men grow up with that kind of nurturing and guidance, clearly. So I think that skipping back to what you're saying, the yes, have to be emotionally intelligent, and also there's the other principle which I think comes up again and again is help people do what they want rather than what society's expectations are. So with my daughter, when she was 6 or 7, I took her to see the movie Brave, the Disney movie Brave, which is about a girl. It was one of the first sort of Disney movies where it's a Scottish girl fighting the Romans, or whatever, and she's a bows and arrows and stuff like that. And it's like a girl as the protagonist in an action cartoon, right? And I wanted her to be exposed to that kind of stuff. And then more subsequently, because that stuff's flipping everywhere now, you can't get away from it. It's like, well, the pendulum swung a bit too far on that. All the girls are being masculine. Everything's Wonder Woman and what's that thing with the Jennifer Lawrence being, about bows and arrows or whatever, being the Hunger Games. It's all about masculinized women now. Star Wars, Rey in Star Wars, and it's kind of like, which is why I watch it go, this doesn't ring true. This is nonsense, right? This is politically correct. This isn't real, really. It seems to me most of the time. No, so now then it's like I'll be balancing out the other way. I said to her, look, at school, maybe this is like 12, 13, 14, I started telling this. At school, one of the interesting things is the teachers have to treat the boys and girls the same. Right? They kind of do, right? And they have to talk about career and studying and going to university and all this kind of stuff, the same for the boys and girls. And that's fine. And it may be that probably for a number of the girls, that won't really be what they find most fulfilling in life. What they'll probably find most fulfilling is having babies. Now, of course, you can do a bit of both, but there's going to be trade-offs. And because what I see is there's many women in their 30s who are going, I've got the career, I've got the money, I've got the house, or the flat, I've got a car, and I'm really well educated and I've got these qualifications. Oh shit, TikTok, I need to have babies. I need to look around for a man who is making more money than me, is better educated than me, is better looking than me, is good. And they want to marry up or across. They don't want to marry down, right, women? And good fucking luck, because all those guys that are that good at the age of, if you're a 35-year-old woman and you're looking at 35 to 40-year-old guys who are doing that well, they've got the pick of the women in their 20s. So good luck, right? You're in trouble. And there's a lot of women who are, this is kind of anecdotal, but who are like, oh my God, and they've left it too late and they're really struggling. So I don't want my daughter to kind of just go on that path blindly without thinking about it, and then just end up in that situations, right? So my job was when I took her to see Brave, it was to expose her to can be the hero, feminine protagonist, woman protagonist leader. When I'm telling her about motherhood, it's because all the dominant messages for everywhere else are not about motherhood, right? They're about, yes, queen, slay it in your career. That's going to bring you fulfillment. And, the number of women who then have children go, fucking hell, having babies is so much better than my career, right? It's really, really cool. So my job isn't to tell her what to do. If she wants to become prime minister or, go into the corporate world or own a mining company or whatever, flipping brilliant, support all the way. If she doesn't want to have kids, if she's, a butch lesbian, whatever she wants to be. But the key is to expose to the whole range and make her develop her self-awareness so she can listen to her own heart and be true to herself. That's what I've always said to her. And I'm just balancing it out and then having that. Now, it's the same with guys. What he's talking about is rather than having them be socialized into this traditional archetype of your job as a man is to sacrifice yourself on the battle, or to risk sacrificing yourself on the battlefield or in the fire department. Or in the really dirty, dangerous jobs or in the army or whatever. And he talks about American football and how it's a really dangerous sport. So again, it's kind of like boys getting, injured a lot. Perhaps doesn't apply so much in this country. Bring some awareness to that and help them see that it's not. I'm paraphrasing what he's saying. I think much better than he says it, but bring some awareness to it so that if you want to go into the Marines or the Navy SEALs or deep sea oil rig welder or whatever it is, flipping great, but do it because you want to do it, not because because you're going to get so many plaudits from society and you'll be encouraged, be the man, do that kind of stuff. So it's like make your own freedom of choice. So it's about listening to your inner compass rather than just being dragged everywhere by society's expectations. So that's the principle that applies to boys and girls, and he's obviously talking about it in terms of boys here. So again, there's virtue in that, emotional intelligence, knowing yourself better, listening to yourself, realizing that society's expectations are society's expectations, and doing what works for you and being true to yourself. So I'm on board with all that as well.
Yeah. And there's an irony there, right? Because in this book, he's talking about having that conversation with boys. And as you've just said, schools don't talk about that to girls. Schools don't talk about, would you like to become a mum and how will you manage that and at what age and how is a career going to fit with having children? Like, it's not spoken about. When I was in school, that wasn't talked about. It was get a career, get a job, go to uni, whatever. And it's not talked about to girls either. It's not talked about, period. Anywhere.
But most of the important things in life aren't talked about in school. And I think that it's exactly. So I tweeted the other day, there's that, in fact, it was one of these tweets that I set up like a few weeks ago that came out. I was, and it was that one that's a skeleton sitting on a park bench. And it's like, you waiting, and then you feel like, and the bottom bit was my put for schools to teach your kids about money. Because they ain't gonna, right?
No.
Because it's on you as a parent to teach your child about budgeting and negotiation and selling and investing. And so, because the teachers can't teach it because they're not doing it themselves. Because what schools teach is work hard and do well in your exams, go to university, and then get a steady job. And the reason they teach that, and they can teach that, is because that's what all the teachers have done. They've done well at school and to study hard relative, they've obviously done fairly well in their exams and they've gone to university and then they've got a job working for the government, if they're in a government school, which most schools are. So, with all the benefits and security and pension, all that kind of stuff. So therefore they are modelling that and they're going to teach that. They can't help unconsciously, but basically communicate that's the best way to live because that's what they're doing. And that's, so that's the kind of role model group that our kids are seeing at school. So if you want schools to teach about, it's like universities trying to teach about entrepreneurship. It's bullshit because entrepreneurs don't spend their time in university departments teaching students. They spend their time being entrepreneurs. Now, you can get them in as guest teachers. There will be this overlap. There will be some people who who love teaching, who've been entrepreneurial. So it's not complete bullshit, but often it's bullshit. It's like there's large bullshit elements. Business schools, are replicating real world experience. It's very, they can't. It's very, very difficult to do that. This is why, business schools are training people to be high-end employees, essentially. So when you get an MBA, it's not teaching you to be an entrepreneur. It's teaching you to be a highly qualified, productive person inside another organisation, somebody else's organisation, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not teaching entrepreneurship.
So if men being full-time dads makes us both do our own version of, even if intellectually I'm like, yeah, I really want that to work, but viscerally I can't quite get it. And even when Owen will joke sometimes, so he's a high earning engineer. He does property as well, does a lot of work on our main residences and, building extensions and adding value there. And as far as, being a man and bringing home the bacon, like he nails that. And the minute, and I work as well, right? And I've got my own property portfolio and I'm running a business and all the rest of it. And again, this is just to speak into that sort of that dynamic. The minute he goes, oh, can I give up work now? Will you buy me a Ferrari? When I'm doing particularly well in business, I just go, oh, stop it. It's like, no, I'm never going to, like, you want a Ferrari? Go back. It's not a Ferrari, so it's a Porsche. He says a Porsche. I'm like, no, you want a Porsche? Go in the money and buy one. It's like, no, I'm not doing that. It makes me feel weird. And even him going, can I give up work now? And he's joking, like he would never give up work. If anything, he'd be in a 12-step program for workaholism. It's not a thing. He jokes about it because he knows I'll go, oh. So how do we deal with that with our boys so that we're not forcing them into a role that's not them? That if they want to be around more, they can. He's always here at breakfast time. He takes the kids to school. He always gets home by 5 o'clock for supper time. He does bath time every night. He's not here 7 nights a month. But outside of that, those 7 nights, so those the morning and the evening around that, he's here at breakfast time. He's home by 5, does bath time and story time. He spends a lot of time with the kids. If I'm working at the weekend, like Saturday I was working, he took the boys to Longleat. He's very involved as a dad and he works really hard. How do we teach that to our children without it being a pendulum going from one direction to the other? And how do we create jobs where men aren't leaving at 7 a.m. and coming home at 7 p.m.?
Well, we live at a time in history when it's most easy to do that. Well, true. I say that going back to pre-industrial times, obviously things are a bit different. But, compared to 50 years ago, you've got the internet, portfolio careers, doing different things a couple of days a week, doing stuff online, working from home, setting up your own business, having a YouTube. There's so many different opportunities. So I don't think it's, look at what both of you guys are doing, right? Owen could stop working and use his property portfolio, which he's built up, or he could sell his properties and just do his job. He could take one. He's got both going on. So he is in the master of his own destiny, really, it seems to me. And so are you. Now that puts us in a, and I've as I said, I've in some ways built my life around my children, and that's so the luxury of being self-employed. Lots of downsides and challenges with being self-employed and paddling your own canoe, right? So it's not like it's all milk and honey, but there's trade-offs. Life's full of trade-offs. So the flexibility, there's so much more flexibility we have in terms of working now. So, and I think that's just going up. That's going up, not down. So I don't think that's going to be a real issue. If they want to do a corporate, if they want to be a banker in the city, then that's going to be a challenge because that's really long hours, etc. And how do you balance that with having a family? And people are going to make different choices. So I think in terms of raising our kids, we just have them be aware of different options and choices. We have them aware they can have things as a portfolio. They can do a bit of this and a bit of that. And that doesn't mean you're a jack of all trades and you don't make money. It can be actually the opposite of that. And they're resourceful kids growing up resourceful parents. They'll figure it out. It's not something that your kids, I don't think you need to be concerned about at all. So again, the role model, what they're seeing, obviously role models so hugely important. Rather more important what we say is what we do and what they see. If they're seeing mum and dad being flexible and mum and dad both being involved, if they're seeing dad loading the dishwasher and changing nappies and doing bath time and this kind of stuff, they'll think that's what dads do, right? And great. And maybe mums do. I don't know about your house. My son's 2 months old, right? Mum is doing a lot more of stuff than I am, but and I'm working. She's not working, right? So, but it's not. So you just got to kind of like retain the flexibility and the ability to communicate with one another and talk. So it's about knowing yourself and listening to your own heart and being willing to just work things out. And if you're emotionally intelligent and are able to negotiate and discuss and step back and not take things personally all the time and not be too rigid, these things are, this is general life skills which are going to help you navigate all of that. And I think to go back to the why we have the ick feeling or it's like, I have, in some ways, I'm tempted by the idea of being a full-time dad, right? Because I'm really into parenting. I'm really into my kids. Like I'm fucking into that more than anything else in my life, right? And and I'm lucky if you want to call it. I make a living from that as well by helping parents and helping teenagers and younger kids and that sort of stuff. So that all fits in with that. Not everybody who's really into their kids, which is a lot of people, is going to make a living by helping people with their kids, right? Obviously, the market isn't there for that. But so I'm tempted by it in a way. And my wife's a doctor. You could
do it, right?
It could be done. Absolutely.
Easy. You could just go, right, I'm done.
Financially, it'd be no problem. When we met, she was earning more than me, right? And now she works 1 day a week, but now, of course, she's having a year off for the baby. But it wouldn't work, and for the same kind of and this is why Warren Farrell does sort of talk about a genetic heritage, and it's always been since time immemorial that, of course, the men are the ones that defend the village against physical attack from other villages or from wild animals, right? And then you scale that up to modern warfare, it's still the men who almost exclusively go into and die in that shit, right? And
on the front line, in a disproportionate majority, probably 99 to 1.
And so it should be. If I think putting women in the front line is nuts in my view, although it's kind of happening. And anyway, that's another conversation. Again, sort of political correctness gone mad. It really. Not because I don't think women should be able to take those risks and get shot if they want. I think that's okay. But what it does for operational effectiveness is just another thing. There's a video I saw the other day of people laugh on social media, right? Of firefighters, and this male firefighter's holding up this big metal pole against the door. They're trying to break through the door, and then the female firefighter's got this axe, and with the back of the axe, she's using it as like a hammer, a sledgehammer kind of thing, to kind of knock this thing. And she's doing it in this kind of like, this thing's too heavy for her. And then she kind of misses, and everyone's going, "Oh my god, if I'm burning to death in that building, I'm going to be so glad there's a woman fucking firefighter." Right? I've got a friend or a guy I know from my gym who's been a firefighter for 20 years, really big, strong guy. And he said, we've got women now. And he said, and it's just ridiculous because they can't fucking do stuff. They can't carry a limp body out of a building. It's just absurd. Anyway, so I digress. So yes, he talks about that sort of historical imperative of men being the defenders and sacrifice themselves, putting themselves at risk. The hero, all the war movies of old, where the man goes off to the battlefield and she's going, "Oh, baby, don't leave me," and he goes, "I have to go and do my duty," and all that kind of stuff. And he's kind of saying, he sort of mentions there's a genetic heritage, but then he kind of makes it all about socialization and what society bribing you with praise and you're the warrior and hero and all the recognition that bribing you to risk your life. But I think there's something deeper than that, because this would also apply even he talks about, this would apply in chimpanzees as well, right? Or other monkeys talks about when there's fights between the monkeys, the male monkeys that go off and are fighting are the ones that get fucked by the females afterwards, and the males that don't go and fight get neglected by the females afterwards. Like, this dynamic exists in apes, not just humans. So there's something a bit deeper than just socialization. And there's a reason all those movies exist. It's not. So there's something about, of course, if you think about my wife now, she is so vulnerable, right? I can't begin to say how vulnerable she is at the moment with a 2-month-old baby. She's exclusively breastfeeding, and she's so scared. Like, she's so, like, her sensitivity to threat and danger is heightened, right? Yeah. Which, again, of course, biological, genetic, totally appropriate, right? So she needs to know that I'm there to protect her and to fight off all the wild animals and stuff that need to be. She needs to know that she can rely on me to be there for her. There's something that's as visceral and as deep as it gets. That's as primal as it gets. And I think this is why that whole masculine feminine dynamic is something you can't eradicate. And this is why it'll win out in the end, right? So for all the political correctness, for all the kind of, men and women are the same, and girls, you can do this and that, and boys, you should do, at the end of the day, as I think I said to you on a voice message clip that we were talking about earlier this morning, or last night, right? At the end of the day, women get sexually aroused by men who are masculine.
That was much more eloquent than how you left the voice message, Kevin. Well done.
Voice message, I put it in a slightly fruitier way, right? But I remember Chris Rock, who got slapped by Will Smith, right, in one of his comedies from like 20 years ago, saying, when a woman goes to a guy who's talking about women paying for stuff in relationships, women paying for stuff on dates, and he said there's nothing that dries up a pussy quicker than paying for stuff on dates, right? It was how he put it, right? He's a comedian, he can get away with it, right? And then he said she goes to a gynecologist, the gynecologist looks at her, she goes, I'm really dry down there. He goes, oh my God, he goes, you've been paying for shit. Right, like it's like now. Of course, we live in an era where women are very largely, single women are as financially empowered as men, right? So it's not like, I don't believe that men should pay for every bloody thing through the courtship. But first date, guy pays because it's a symbolic thing about when you're breastfeeding, looking after that baby, or when you're heavily pregnant and you need protection, I will be there as a protector and I will provide for us as a family unit. There's something so deeply visceral about that. And that, the feminine wants to be able to let go and feel safe in the arms of the masculine. And that's where the deepest fulfillment for both parties lies. And that is biological. We are a sexually reproducing species. We have sexual dimorphism. Men are bigger and stronger and different to women. We're not as sexually dimorphic as all species, So sea lions, I think it is, are the male sea lion or elephant seals, 10 times the weight of the females. So they're very sexual, like 10-to-1 weight ratio. But we're not like swans either, where swans, you can't tell the difference. It's virtually identical, right? We are in between those things, and men and women are different. And I think it's almost like he doesn't really talk about that. So I think that
there's a bit where so I love the book, right? So it's great. You're like, I'm not sure, and it's. Again, I think what's coming up for me as we're having this conversation, and this is why I do this podcast, I love actually having the conversation. And when it adds value to people listening, it's like, that's the bonus, okay? And for me, to speak into the, needing to feel protected, the visceral, it's almost like there's a battle here between intellectualizing these conversations and what actually goes on, like you say, biologically and viscerally. And when I had Charlie, first child, right? So it was even more visceral than with Rupert, because it was kind of like, okay, I've done this before. I kind of know what's going to happen. There's some unknowns and there's some slight nuances, but and almost there's more fear because I know what the birth's going to be like. But generally, there's more confidence. I have more confidence. I didn't have to learn routines and nappies and breastfeeding.
Sure, of course.
The second time. But the first time, I remember a few months before I gave birth, I did not, and I've traveled all over the world. I think nothing of getting on a train to London, doing a speaking engagement, coming back at 3:00 in the morning, getting in a taxi to come home. Like, that's no big deal to me, right? Once I was pregnant, I was like, I cancelled all my speaking engagements. I didn't really want to go too far away from the house. I didn't really want to go anywhere without Owen. I was almost with myself going, fuck, what's wrong with me? What's going on? It was so visceral. There was nothing intellectual about it, to the point where I was like, dude, am I ever going to get that part of me back? Is this it now? Like, now I'm a mum. Is this it? Like, I don't want to go to London and speak. I don't want to do X, Y, Z. And then once I'd had Charlie, and like you say, it's such a vulnerable place to be. And I was breastfeeding and I was still working. So I think this is the thing to really speak into. I was still working, but I was working from home. And I was still doing, having my clients and workshops and stuff after about a month, I think. But my clients come to me in my home and I feed them. And the way I actually do my business is very nurturing. And it's actually very feminine. Even though we talk about the subject of money, actually what we deal with is people's lives. And if Owen said, let's go out for dinner, which we don't do very often, I love cooking and we like being at home and all the rest of it, I wouldn't go further than 2 minutes drive away from the house in case something happened to Charlie, or, a bit later on, Charlie and Rupert. I was like, I need to be able to get home very quickly. And if I have to go any further than a mile or two, I'm not interested. I won't go. And that feeling with both children only started to dissipate when they got near 2. So it's starting to happen again now with Rupert. So I spoke a few weeks ago. We're starting to even consider the idea that maybe in the spring we'll go skiing for like 3 or 4 days without the kids, which prior I'd have been like, yeah, right, that face. I'd be like, no fucking way. And even now I'm like, ooh, that's a long way away to be. And I can only get my head around it because our kids have such amazing relationships with our parents that, they're like, both of my mum and Owen's mum were at both births. They are so involved in our children, to the point where sometimes when the kids are upset, they'll go to the grandparents. They'll push us out the way to get to the grandparents. That's how close they are. And because of that, I can just about get my head around to maybe having a few days away with Owen in another country, not just down the road. And so whilst, again, intellectually, I'm like, yes, men could stay at home and women could go to work. And how do we support men to do that? I'm like, yeah. I don't know if that's actually physically possible.
It's about freedom. It's about, yeah, exactly. No, one of my ex-girlfriends from university is a very senior doctor. Her dad was a very senior doctor as well. And she went back to work after 2 weeks as a doctor, apparently, I've heard. And just kind of like went back full time after 2 weeks, which to me seems a bit weird. And I'm glad she's an ex, right? So, but what you're describing is, that so she wants to do that. That's okay, right? That's her choice,
sure.
right?
So there's no
that's right, exactly. But that's going to be such a minority, right? And what you're describing is a hormonal fucking and neurological, deeply programmed thing. And my wife's exactly the same. Like today, I think she went out. Baby's 2 months old yesterday, right? And she went out 2 or 3 days ago for the first time without the baby. And she went into town for like an hour. And I think, it was the first time she'd driven a car as well. And she had a cesarean, emergency cesarean, so she couldn't drive for a bit. But, before that, I, with or without my daughter, had taken the baby out in a pram for a couple of times for like an hour. And that was the only time she's been apart from him. And, and today, all the mums from their antenatal class are supposed to be meeting up somewhere. And so she's like gearing herself up for that. And I've put a car seat in her car so she can do it. And she's like, oh, yeah, if I've got the energy, I'll go. It's like, it's a big thing to even go out with the baby, right? To drive about 20 minutes from the house is where they're meeting, right? And she's like, oh, it's a big.
And again, she's a GP.
She's not a ditzy little bimbo who has been kept, who's been brought up to be a housewife all her life. Do you know what I mean? It's like, this is not. She's an empowered woman. So there's hormonal stuff, there's genetic stuff, there's biological stuff, and trying to pretend that doesn't affect our psychology and the choice we make in life is just fucking idiotic. It is absolutely fucking idiotic, and yet it is oh so common. It's so common that people just intellectualize the thing of trying to, figure it all out intellectually and make things should or shouldn't be, rather than dealing with reality as it is. And I think Warren falls into that trap a bit. So I think that the thing that I think is very missing for the book is any conversation about the masculine and feminine, really, and the I don't know what Warren's marriage is like. I don't know if he's married. I don't know. Interestingly, isn't. That's not mentioned in his little bio about his own kids or stuff. I don't know. I don't know whether him and his wife are still having sex. I don't know what's going on, right? But the polarized, the polarity of masculine and feminine is what sexual attraction depends on, and that is very evident now in my relationship with my wife, because she's so in her nurturing feminine, and that's all part of that polarity, and that's a it's not only that's like something it's futile to resist because it's ingrained in us by millions of years of evolution. It's not just that. It's not something that, if we try and ignore it, we do so at our peril and it will fuck us up the way actually you can argue has fucked up a lot of people. And it's only fucked me up, I think, in my early adult life, because I didn't.
Well, me too, right? I'm divorced.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, we were
completely. We were like brother and sister living together, and this is on me, right? I was really masculine, it just, and I get this, the dynamic, and everyone's got their responsibility and all the rest of it. What I'm saying is, I don't blame him. I was absolutely, I was a man in the relationship, and then we got what we got. It didn't work.
Absolutely. So, but not only is there that, but also, rather than being something we can't avoid, it's actually, when we embrace it, it's the most fucking beautiful thing in the world, in life. That fulfillment of for a woman to be able to let go and really relax into her feminine with a man and feel safe with him and trust him. And what that does for a man in that same time as well, how that feels for him. It's so beautiful. It's so enriching. Same with parenthood, right? And if people don't want to have children, that's okay. You're kind of making a decision not to have kids is kind of is doing something that none of your ancestors have ever done. Like, go back, all your ancestors have reproduced, right? So it's like you're doing something slightly odd, and no other species on Earth does it. No other species on Earth decides not to reproduce. Like the alpha, we have it obviously in humanity. We have it with high status males like the Pope or the Dalai Lama. Spiritual religious traditions will be deliberately celibate, and we have intellectuals. We have this idea of in humans, sometimes we want to pass on our ideas more than we want to pass on our genes. So we might found something and leave a legacy which is about ideas and influence rather than genetic. That no other species do that. The alpha male of the chimpanzee group doesn't go, oh yeah, well, you fuck the females and have the babies, and I'll just write a book about it. No, there's no chimpanzees doing that, right? so it's a bit odd that humans do that, but it's fine. They can make their own choices. But I feel you're sort of a bit out of touch with something that's most deeply visceral part of yourself. Your drive is to survive and reproduce. That's what life's about, right? So the fulfillment that comes from parenting, and you can't. Every parent that I've ever worked with, I always say to them, when you had your first child, and when you were holding them in your arms and you felt, oh my God, I never knew I could love another human being this much. And they all say, yes, I remember that. Men or women, they all fucking remember that, right? None of them ever go, oh no, I didn't think that. They all remember that, right? My wife's having that experience now, of course. That is such a rewarding, amazing thing that you can't communicate to someone in a theoretical basis, but it's so visceral when you just take the plunge, you have a kid, it's like, wow, right? It's a different level. So all this masculine and feminine stuff, and the fact that we have different predispositions in terms of sexual relationships and how we relate to each other sexually, and in the relationship dynamic, and how we relate to parenting, that's a beautiful thing to embrace. It's not something to try and erase. That ain't going to work, and you're going to be missing out if it did work. I think you're selling yourself short in life. So I think that how we embrace the masculine and the feminine and integrate those into our modern lives in a time of equality of opportunity that we have for men and women, that is the challenge. How do we maybe don't want to go back to 100 years ago where my wife was not allowed to be a doctor in the UK, or I had to go off to war, or I'd be shamed for that. But we have this freedom of choice. But then, how do we stop the pendulum? We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We want to still be able to have that kind of juiciness, that zing, that polarity of masculine and feminine, and mums and dads being different but equally valuable.
And how does someone listening to this saying, well, I'm a woman, I earn more than my man, we've got a child. How do they keep, because that's going to happen, right? I know people.
Yeah, of course.
That situation is true. And they absolutely adore each other and it works and all the rest of it. And in the book, I think, and this is part of why I loved a lot of the book, and I completely agree with you. It talks a lot, and it's a long way round of saying some good messages, and there's lots that's missing. It talks a lot in that book about not disregarding men when they do that, not undermining men, not being disrespectful for men, all of that world, which gets very easy to do societally when men aren't bringing home the bacon, when they're being stay-at-home dads. You know, it's a very sort of easy way to then actually denigrate men when they're doing that. And I get all that. I'm like, okay, that's fine. That makes sense. And actually just being respectful and not being a dick kind of works in life. It's not just about how women speak to their man. It's like that just works. So it makes sense. And it doesn't answer the question, which you've already said. It doesn't talk about masculine and feminine. So how do couples where the woman's earning more and the man is doing more childcare, how do they keep the polarization so that they don't end up not having sex? And whilst they get on very well and everything's kind of cool, it's actually not, because they're not having sex, which last time I checked is the difference between an intimate relationship and a friendship.
Indeed. And this is one of the big problems, isn't it? Because as the polarity between masculine and feminine has been lost or greatly decreased in the Western world, divorce rates go up, fertility rates go down. It's all part of the same thing. Well, how have you done it? So you're a woman. You're asking that question. Now, I'm not saying you make more than your husband, but you.
I don't. You see that? I think that's
no, but you're not. Yeah, but hang on a minute.
Go on.
You're financially independent, right? So when you met him, you didn't need his finances, right? He could have given up his job and you could have supported him, right?
Yeah.
Now, yeah, okay. But what I'm saying is, you're not. How do you stay in your feminine? Even though you're masculine at work and you've been masculine historically, how do you be feminine with him?
So that's a really good question. There's something that Owen said to me a while back when we were, I don't know whether it was we'd already had Charlie or prior. He said it a couple of times. And short version, he said to me, if you don't want to go back to work, you don't have to, I'll take care of you. And although I didn't want to not go back to work, him saying that was magic. I was just like, that whole, I can relax. I don't have to earn money. I don't have to work. I can bring up the kids. He was like, if you want, and the deeper conversation were things like, if you want a nanny and go to work, I get it. You say how you want to be a mum and I'll support that. So he was very...
So okay, so I get that, and I get that's not an option for everybody.
Yeah, so that was going to be my question back to
you. But hang on, but no, you were in your feminine before that with him. When you met him, when you were with him, you hadn't been in the past with other relationships, right?
Yeah.
So something shifted in you that because the work you did, you were able to be in your feminine and to let the man lead and be in his masculine.
Yeah.
Like, we talked the other day. I asked you away from the podcast. You are, when it comes to real estate and property, you fucking know what you're doing, right? Like you don't need somebody else to mentor you. Well, I'm sure we all do, but and yet I asked you about the decisions. So I was interested in who wears the trousers in your relationship. You went Owen, 100%. Like, that was really clear. You were unequivocal. It's a congruent Owen. There's no doubt about that. He wears the trousers in the relationship. And I said, what about when you're buying a property? Because your new property you're intending to buy, it's a big decision. And I went, he found it. He said, right, I think I found the one, blah, blah. And I went and basically approved it. But he was, again, the driver in that.
Yeah.
Now, so what is it about you that enables you to relax and let your man lead that you didn't have before?
Yeah, so the thing that's different for me is I don't tell him what to do. I don't direct him. So when I'm in what I call, and we have explicit conversations as well when we're having conversations, I have wife mode. And the way I am with Owen is very different to any other man on the planet. So I don't direct him. I don't tell him what to do. I don't tell him what I think unless he explicitly asks me to be in like property mode or coach mode or business mode. If he asks for that, I will do it. And usually I'll go, are you really sure? I think someone else can answer this and you can figure this out. I'm really clear that I'm like, you've got this. You'll figure it out. You know what you're doing. If he ever comes to me and is concerned, whereas with a girlfriend, I would be very reassuring and I'd, listen. And there's something for me where I go, he's got it and he'll figure it out. And I will explicitly say that.
Yes. So if I may paraphrase that, it sounds like you trust him.
Yes.
And even if you have doubt, you just kind of let him.
Yeah.
It's like the classic thing, right?
Mm.
A guy's driving, the woman's in the car, they're trying to find pre-sat nav, they're trying to find somewhere. She wants to stop. Should we stop and ask directions? Like, no, I'll fucking figure it out, right? And what the woman's like, stop and ask. You're so annoying. Stop and ask. You need to stop and ask something. It's so annoying. Like, no, fucking let the guy figure it out. Because men like to figure it out. They want to sort it out themselves, right? They don't want to. If he wants to stop and ask directions, he can, but let him do it. Otherwise, you're undermining his leadership, essentially. Yeah. Now, so what I hear is that which I suspect you did. This is the answer you're saying. If a woman's listening to this and she earns more money, what you've just answered that, right? Trust him. Just let him be aware of it. So you can be at work, be in the hotshot law or whatever. You can be the CEO. You can be in charge in those environments. You can be in your masculine leadership energy then. But when you're with your husband, drop that shit. Trust him and let him. Now, of course, it's easier when he's willing to take the lead and willing to step up because it's a dynamic, right? So if he's like, oh, where do you want to go? If you say to him, where are we going for dinner? And he goes, oh, I don't know, love. You decide. Where do you want to go? Then you're going to go, ugh. There won't this fucking bloke make his... But so he's got to do that as well, right? But if you just go, oh, well, you decide. I trust you to make a good decision. You can then invite him into that leadership as well, right?
Yeah.
And, some women might be listening to this and cringing, but then have a look, have a think. Because my wife would be similar, right? She was the masculine figure in her previous marriage. She was in charge. She earned the money. She was in charge in other respects, which I'm not going to go into. And when she was with me, immediately she met me. She was like, "Oh my god, I can't be." I think a phrase she said to me, so I thought, "Oh, I can't do that with this one," but not in a kind of, "Oh, that's a shame," but in, "Oh, that's really good."
Yeah.
Because she can't take the lead. And I remember, I think I might have said this before, one time when we were lying fully clothed on the bed one day, and she was sitting astride me, and she was going, "Oh my god, I can finally relax. Oh, I can finally let go. I can finally." So it's a willingness to let go and relax, and trust a man. But of course, you've got to find a man that's trustworthy. But then
well, there's two. I would say yes, and if I look back now, I'm not saying that my marriage. Knowing what I know now, would my first marriage have worked? I don't think so. I think we would have actually not stayed together for as long. So I'm not saying like, oh, if I'd have been different then, it would have worked. Because people have got confused by this when I've been talking to them in the past about relationships. But I very clearly damaged our relationship by not trusting, but he actually didn't give me any reason not to trust him. And the thing that happened, which is such a self-fulfilling prophecy, is because I didn't trust him, and like he wasn't doing anything wrong, but as in trust him to like make the decisions and do the finances, actually then he didn't do it as well. Does that make sense? So it's like I created that.
Of course, yeah.
It's a real dance because
it's a dance. Exactly.
My stuff. It was my stuff that fucked. I mean, it was both our stuff that fucked us over ultimately. But if I look from my responsibility, I didn't trust men, right? And I couldn't trust men, and I was really controlling, and I wouldn't allow myself to trust men. So then, when I was in a relationship, how I was back then with David was I didn't trust him. Can you imagine, like, what was that like for him being with his woman who like doesn't trust him? That's horrific for a guy. And he'd given me no reason to, absolutely no reason. It was all my stuff, my childhood stuff. I've done the work. I've been in 12-step programs. I've had therapy. I've done Landmark, read books, had coaches, all the rest of it. And I can really clearly see that I created that. He didn't actually do anything wrong. So the thing that we also don't have in this conversation is that us as women, we undermine men and then we go, look, they're useless. See, I knew I couldn't trust him. I had to take control. And it's like, no, because you believe that it happened.
Right, bingo. So yes, exactly. It's a dance. It's absolutely the thing.
Yeah.
And so he lived down to your expectations essentially. So he thought.
Yeah.
So you were saying, oh, I don't trust him to do X, Y, Z, and then he kind of stopped bothering to do it very well, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Whereas when you say, I trust you, honey, you take care of it, that's when guys will go, whoa, and that's when they'll step up, right? But it takes a bit of faith on your part. So you've just given great answers to the question you posed about how women who earn more can be in their feminine, right? I knew you'd be better at answering that than me because you've been on that journey, and they're going to hear it better from you because you're a woman.
Yes, I guess I've always thought, I don't really know, because actually with Owen and I, we both earn, and, we don't have the quote unquote problem of, he's not earning a lot less. We are kind of, I want to say, Matt, he earns more than me. He's a much higher earner than me, really. From a salaried point of view, my background is as a chef. I'm used to earning not a lot. He's always been an engineer and very high earning from a young age. So, yeah, interesting, really interesting. And
but it's about the money's just one aspect of it, right? So if you feel that he's, you're looking after him and he's just another child you've got, obviously that's going to be hard to respect.
Which is such a common thing that women say, right? Oh, I've got 3 kids, meaning one of them's their husband.
Yeah, I don't really hear that, because if someone says that, I fucking avoid them if they talk like that. I don't hang out with people who think like that. But I read that that's something people say online. But the point is being willing to trust him and willing to let him be in his masculine, and inviting him to step into that. And obviously, from the man, if I was advising the guy, I would say, well, she may earn more money than you, but it doesn't make you less of a man or any of that bullshit. And she still wants you to lead. She still wants you to make decisions about what restaurant you go to. You can still be the one driving when you go somewhere. If there's a cockroach, you deal with it. If there's a burglar breaks in, who the fuck is going to go and confront the burglar, right? Like, it's really clear. So step up with that shit and deal with killing the cockroach and deciding which restaurant to go to. Just make some decisions, because the feminine, we're all masculine and we're all feminine, but in different ratios, right? Men are more masculine, women are more feminine, but we can all do both, right? Woman can be CEO, man can look after the babies, be nurturing, right? But the feminine energy does not make decisions. The masculine energy makes decisions. So if you ask a woman to make a decision, she has to go into a masculine to do it. So that's why what I hear when you're trusting Owen and he's sort of saying, "What do you think about this?" You kind of go, "Oh, let somebody else," because you're stepping back from that that going into that masculine energy and taking charge and making decisions and stuff like that. Unless it's an explicit, sometimes it's okay. It's okay sometimes, right? Like, my wife's an expert in health. Most doctors aren't, by the way, but she is, and so so when it comes to health stuff, I will. Sometimes I'll be advising her on health stuff. Sometimes, but I will say, "Well, what do you think about this? What do we need to do about this?" Our son's got a hernia, right? He's got a hernia, spotted a hernia. So when do you think? What do you think? So she can make decisions about that kind of stuff in an area of expertise. But it's not the dominant way our relationship works, and that's why she's more fulfilled than she was in a previous marriage, and I'm more fulfilled in mine. And dance is absolutely the right phrase for it. So that's something which is, I think, a big missing from the book, and the way just having our kids understand about the masculine and feminine and about these things that we're talking about puts them well ahead of most people, albeit that there's some sort of deep, visceral knowing for it that, and which paradoxically less educated people tend to get. It's the kind of intellectual, cerebral, I've read all these theoretical books about, social constructs types that often get fucked in the head about stuff like that, get themselves confused. And then the other thing, which is related, which he doesn't talk about, which I was really, because John Gray, who wrote Mars, Venus, which I've tried to read 3 times and can't get through because I don't like it. But his more recent book, Beyond Mars, Venus, which is about masculine and feminine dynamics in the Western world today and how hormones change, how hormones have changed, and men have got lower testosterone and women have got higher testosterone, all this kind of stuff, and how that's all part of the depolarization. It's part of a vicious cycle. I think it's really good work. But that wasn't, he talks about it. None of that was mentioned in here. But the other thing was, they don't talk about initiations. And one of the things that I think that boys are really missing out on is any kind of sense of initiation into adulthood. Because every tribal society, every traditional society, everywhere throughout human history has initiated boys into adulthood. And that's a missing today in our culture. And of course, going off to war would have been one version of that, because I don't recommend this, but going off to the trenches in the First World War at the age of 17, 18, you'd fucking come back different, right? But that's too extreme, of course.
Well, national service prior to that would have been, there was that.
Yeah.
You go away and you have to start being an adult, and it's done in a very masculine.
Yeah, and they kind of break you down, then rebuild you, and this sort of stuff. That's something that's very lacking. And now there's this idea that it's not the need. Well, it's not even an idea that's not needed. It's just something that everyone's just forgotten about, basically. But the authors that I find inspiring when it comes to raising boys and raising men and all talk about this, right? So why the fuck he's not talking about that, I don't know, because that seems a big mistake. I mean, he talks about a couple of things. He talks about how the finding that when there's a single parent, the kids that are single parents have a single parent dad do better than the kids who have a single parent mum.
Yes, so everybody, Kevin did just say that right. Say it again, Kevin, because I read that and went, whoa, really?
But the finding is that if the child, boy or girl, particularly boy, but girl as well, if they're going to be raised by only one parent, they're better off with the dad than the mother. Now, he does, the caveat to that is that we may not be comparing like with like fully, because obviously there are way more single mothers raising kids than there are single dads raising kids. So the single dads raising kids are a self-selecting group of dads who are really, really, like, some of them it's the mother's died, of course, but some of them it's like they've fought for custody or whatever. So they are highly motivated. So they're probably not representative of all dads. So that may be why, or part, or I don't know how we control for that and figure that out. But the fact is they do better with the dad than a mum. The dad part is more important, both boys and girls. Anyway, I'm not saying that's the truth, because, as I said, the self-selecting group, we're not comparing apples with apples necessarily. But the whole idea of, kids are better off with their mums, which has been bought into, and so the feminist agenda of the 70s we were talking about earlier about, it's all about empowering the women can have their cake and eat it, they can have their new boyfriend and take the kids with them. Is not valid. So so dads are, so again, this probably feeds into why he's also quite keen on this idea of more stay-at-home dads, because dads are really good at it. John Lennon liked it, whatever. But a lie, which I'm not buying into that. But what I'm aligned to is that the initiation of boys need men, right? And the initiation of boys into manhood is not something that's done by fucking women. The initiation of boys into manhood can only be done by men. Like, how obvious is that, right? And yet, you will be, that's kind of controversial to say, because, you're shaming single mums, you're guilt tripping single mums. Just like if you say breast milk is best for babies, you're shaming all the women who can't breastfeed, you're shaming the people. No, I know.
Been straight about it.
Yeah, straight. Some women can't breastfeed. There's always been about 15% of women who couldn't breastfeed, right? And in tribal societies, the babies would be passed around and fed by the other women, or they'd feed them on goat's milk and other stuff. And some of those kids would flipping die. So formula milk is fantastic. It saves children's lives. We had lots of trouble with it. And it's only been the last 3 weeks it's been exclusively breastfed. It was really difficult. I can totally see why so many women give up. I'm not criticising or dissing any of those women, including my own mother, right? And, has huge advantages to breastfeeding. It is the best thing in all sorts of ways for both the mother and the baby. That doesn't mean you're shaming other people. You're just being straight about the fact. So similarly, women can't teach boys how to be men because they're not men. And mothers play differently with kids, and they're much more concerned with safety. And no, don't push them too far, and don't do too much. That's a bit risky, and that's a bit dangerous. And if we're going out for the day, let's pack the kitchen sink. We've got to take everything. So we've got everything's planned out. Whereas the dads just go, "Come on, we're going. Yeah, if we need a coat, we'll buy one when we get there." They just fucking walk out the door without anything, right?
And it's so true. It's so true.
And there's no right or wrong. The point is they're both valuable.
Both valid,
The sons and the daughters need both. They both benefit from both, right? No
I remember us talking about this, and I said, "Come on then, Kev, when are you going to start doing this kind of thing for boys?" And we were talking, and I still stand for you doing that at some point in the future, so that here's Charlie.
They've got kids. Yeah. Well, no, and that's something the last 2 or 3 months I've been kind of busy, but it's in the back of my mind, right? So how do we initiate our boys into manhood? Because what initiation has traditionally involved is some kind of trial and danger, right? And in the Maasai, they would you had to be at the forefront of defending the village against wild animals at like the age of 13 or 14. I even read one thing saying that actually the Maasai, you had to go out and kill a lion on your own. They don't do that anymore, obviously, but it used to be the thing you had to go and kill a lion on your own. I don't know how accurate that is, but I've read that. But you go out and kill a lion on your own, you're going to feel a bit different about it afterwards if you make it back. They also, what they definitely do is go and they spend like a few days on their own in the bush, and the men are there. What happens is the men come and grab the boy from his mother's tent hut or whatever house in the middle of the night. And the mother goes, "Oh, don't take my baby," because that's what mothers are going to think, right? And they're going to they go, "Fuck off! It's not about you anymore." And they take him, and they take him off into the bush, and they keep an eye on him. So he's not actually in that much danger because they're around, but he doesn't know it. So he thinks he's on his own, and he has to survive on no food for 48 hours or whatever, or maybe he can kill something. And then they also circumcise him with a sharp stone, with no anaesthetic at the age of 14. And when you and the phrase that sticks in my head, I'll never forget this phrase, is you must not blink or make a sound as you're being circumcised without anaesthetic by these adult men with a sharp stone. So you must not flinch or make a sound. So you've got to kind of like go with it. Now, and then, again, I'm not advocating that, right?
I was just about to say, for anyone listening, we're not advocating this. We're just saying what happens.
This still goes on. This still goes on in South Africa today, and it actually is a bit of an issue because it goes wrong quite a lot, and some kids die, and some of them are deformed for life, mutilated. Like that's not a tradition. But the point of the story is, when you then come back to the village after that experience, and you don't sleep in your mother's tent anymore, everyone is going to treat you differently. Everyone is going to see you differently, and you're going to see yourself differently. That's the point. How you relate to yourself is shifted, right? That's a profound thing. And we have nothing of that in Western society. And so lost boys just think that, getting older. See, women don't need it as much anyway, but also women have menstruation. So they have this rite of passage built into their bodies. It's like, oh, not only have I got tits and arse, but I've got bleeding, right? Like it's like, and then the sisterhood gathers round and advises you on how to handle your periods, right? Your mother, your aunties, whatever, and you have these conversations, right? So there's a very noticeable change, and you've got that stuff to deal with. Boys, that doesn't really exist. So they don't get initiated, and he doesn't have. Why the fuck isn't he talking about that? Now he talks about getting male role models and spending time with men. He even talks about the Boy Scouts as being a good thing. But of course, the problem with the Boy Scouts is it's not the Boy Scouts. They let girls in now. And they started doing that in the UK, I think, 2007. And I thought, maybe they don't do it in America. Because I'm sure they bloody don't do it in Saudi Arabia, right, if they have the Boy Scouts. But, I looked into... And in America, I think the Boy Scouts vote... I think this book's 2019 or something when he wrote this. But the Boy Scouts in America decided in 2017, I think I looked online, to start letting girls in as well. So, well, that's fucked. The girl guides don't let boys in because they want to keep it as a girl-only space, and that seems right and appropriate, and it is. But the Boy Scouts, we're going to let girls in because we shouldn't have a male-only space. Why not? Boys don't count. Oh, well, the girls wanted to do more adventure-type things rather than do, knitting and stuff like that. Well, get the girl guides to do fucking adventure-type stuff then. Don't come in and get in the way of the boys' stuff. So male-only spaces are being eroded and seen as less important.
Well, and worse than less important, they're made wrong.
Made wrong.
They're made wrong. They shouldn't exist. They're misogynist. They're patriarchy. They're this, they're that. And it's like, hang on a second.
Well,
it's like when I see women-only networking events, it's like, all right, fine. But if you say men-only networking event, oh my God, you're a pig.
Yeah.
It's like,
and I get there's a difference, right? It's because historically, men-only clubs, golf clubs, etc., were places where power was exercised, business deals were done, and women were economically excluded. Therefore, and you could say, well, that was bad. You could also say, well, that was okay because they weren't making them. Those men had families attached to them. They were doing deals for their sake, but also for providing for their families. So it's not like it was the idea that men make money. The women don't. Women spend most money in marriages, right? The women do the fucking spending. So the idea, the guys are making more money, therefore that's really bad. No, the wives are spending it. So it's like, it's not this whole kind of division of men against women is insane. And it's predicated on this kind of like taking the nuclear family and breaking it down into just man and woman, and they're not together. And then of course people who are single or never have children, who can't hold a relationship down or whatever, want to be totally autonomous, atomized individual social units, and go, well, it's not fair if if this isn't fair for this women's choice. And it's like, it's undermining the partnership and the teamwork that men and women can do so wonderfully together. So so male-only spaces are becoming rarer and rarer and becoming infiltrated. I know there's the whole thing about female-only spaces and trans rights. There's another different conversation, but so I start understanding why they don't want women to be excluded from those things, and there's some truth, but similarly with sport, actually, I see it, right. So with some, say, football, soccer, right, football is traditionally a very male place where guys would go, working class men would go there, shout, scream, swear at the referee, all that kind of stuff. And it's really great that it's now more family friendly and more people can go, and all that's good and everything. And then there's this kind of like having women pundits and commentators all the time, which is fine, and sometimes they're really great. Some of the good ones are, but there's also this kind of like, we've always got to have women involved on an equal footing. So, for example, I was listening to the cricket yesterday's Test match, right? England, New Zealand for 5 days, and at the tea time they had a conversation about spin bowling, and they had 3 spin bowlers talking about the art of spin bowling. 2 of them men, 1 was a woman. Now the guys have been in the fucking cauldron of playing for England. These are very well-known spin bowlers, right? And it is so competitive to get to that level, right? It is ultra competitive. You've got a pyramid of hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of kids, hundreds of thousands of kids feeding in, and they've reached the pinnacle. So it's really, really competitive. The standard's really, really high, and you are really, really in the media glare and spotlight with huge crowds watching you, huge pressure, huge media attention, all that kind of stuff. So performing, that's interesting. Now, they also had a woman, and the pyramid would have been so much tinier because so few women play cricket, so much less competitive, so much easier to get to the top. And they haven't been performing in the media glare and the cauldron, and it's not like a nasty and aggressive women's sport in the way that men's sport is anyway. And so when she's talking, and you're thinking, this doesn't ring true. It's not the same, right? It doesn't ring true. Now, that's fine if you want to broaden participation and make girls feel more involved. And that's okay, girls can play cricket, that's cool. But the kind of pretense of treating it as if it's the same, pretending it's the same, it's like, it's not. It's like, it's a different sport. It's a different sport, really. And the same thing goes on with football. I was talking about football earlier. That now it's like we have a woman pundit, a female pundit, who's maybe played for England 100 times or whatever. And it's like, yeah, but that ain't the same as playing for England men 100. It's a different thing altogether in terms of the pressure and what you've been through to get there. I mean, my daughter, her teacher in the year 12, her first year at high school, sorry, 12 years old, year 7, 12 years old. Her teacher played cricket for England, a woman who played cricket for England. So this is obviously 8 years ago, and she played cricket for England, I don't know, 8 years before that, right? So then the pyramid was even taught. But basically, she told me the story that when she was 16 or something, 15 or 16, she'd had a go one day, and she was really good at hitting the ball. And they said, "Oh, you should play." And then within 2 years, she was in the England cricket team. But it's like, which is great because that was obviously the pyramid. So, but like, that's not the same as what it takes to get to bat for fucking England in the men's. Like, it's a different thing altogether. So if she were then to go on and have her as a pundit, or she played for England this number of times, it'd be like, it's not the same thing. And it doesn't mean that the women's cricket or the women's football are bad or wrong or anything, but there are different sports, right? This is why when John McEnroe was asked 3 years ago, what it was about Serena, we're talking about Serena Williams, obviously very, very successful athlete. A very successful athlete who, by the way, when she had her baby at the age of 33 or 35, what it was, said shortly before she gave birth, said, giving birth, she put on social media, I feel like I'm going to become a complete woman by giving birth, having a baby. And of course, fuck me, did she get shit for that, right? People freaked. So if I haven't given birth, why not a complete woman? But this was her speaking. She was connected to something deep and visceral
about her experience.
Yeah, in her soul, right?
And you can't say, how it was for her.
Yeah, Serena, you're selling out the sisterhood. She's like, you can't say Serena hasn't gone into the world of competitive sports, but she said this is going to make me feel. She's talking anyway. Whatever. When John McEnroe was being asked about Serena, and he said, she's the greatest woman tennis player of all time. And then someone challenged him and said, hang on a minute, surely she's the greatest tennis player of all time. And he was like, no, she's the greatest woman tennis player of all time. And they were like, hang on, she's won more Grand Slams than any of them. And McEnroe wouldn't back down. And he said, that's different. It's a different sport. And he was slated for that by some. But he's right, because the pyramid race is going to be broader. The level of competitiveness, it is a different sport. And it doesn't mean that women's tennis is bad or wrong, and I can enjoy watching it sometimes, but it's not the same intensity. So this kind of determination, we don't do our sons or our daughters any favors by trying to pretend that these things are the same. And what it's doing, it's kind of we talk about male only spaces, right? So the sphere of football, soccer, as a working class male masculine domain, is being eroded, in my view. I know that's really unpolitically correct, and you never hear that on the mainstream media or on TalkSport or BBC or anything. They never say that.
Yeah, you're never going to get on the BBC with that comment, Kev.
But it's true. And when you and there's a kind of Emperor's New Clothes thing going on, right? Which is of people watching football, watching women's sport, and talking about how good it is. And when you watch it, it's like, when I see it, it's like watching teenage boys play. And that's actually true. When if you put the England women's football team up against a 15-year-olds boys team of England schoolboys, the boys would win, right? This has been done in other sports. This has been done occasionally,
and it's why we have women's sports.
Women's sports. But what it means is, when I watch football, because when I watch women's football, because you see it looks to me like the ball is the pitch is too big, the ball is too heavy, and the goals are too large, because the whole thing has been designed for men. And then when women play it, they don't have the power or the speed, because power and speed and strength are integral parts of the game. So then when I watch it, I'm like, this is like, I remember when I was a kid, they used to have the England schoolboys on telly, and I watched England under-16s versus Scotland under-16s at Wembley on TV. So it's England schoolboys. And I was like, oh, this would be good. I was like 14 at the time. I remember watching it and thinking, this is rubbish, because they couldn't kick the ball as far or as hard or as fast as the grown men that I was used to watching, because they were 15 or 16. And that's what it's like when I see women's football, which is fine. I mean, girls want to play football. If my daughter wants to play football, great. I'm going to encourage support her. But pretending it's the same and that people should see it as the same it's kind of like this sort of ignoring of like an Emperor's New Clothes. We're going to pretend reality isn't there. We're just going to kind of say, no, we don't see that. We're blind to that. And that, I don't think, is doing anybody any favours.
And if you flip it the other way, so if you say, right, well, men's football, it's now been, it's now family friendly, and now women go, and now we have women's football, and we're all supposed to be the same. And, that used to be men's space where they'd go and blow off steam and, like you say, shout and swear and, do whatever. The female version of that, I mean, I go away twice a year with 3 other girlfriends for the weekend. If a man tried to come along, I'd be like, fuck off. I don't want, no, you're not coming. And that doesn't matter if it's Owen or we have male friends, although I kind of don't, we know each other and we're really good friends. But, generally my friends are women, right? And I would never invite you along to our girls' weekend. It would be weird. No offense.
Yeah, I'd probably be. I'm washing my hair that weekend, but thanks. Yeah.
And yet I'm allowed to say that. But woe betide you tell me I'm not allowed to come to your football match.
Yeah.
And it's just so, to me, it's like, why can't men have their things and why can't women have our things? Why do we have to be the same space? I mean, I'm watching, my kids are 2 and 4. Ruby's just starting in nursery and he still plays on his own, right? He's still at the age where they play next to each other, but they're actually playing on their own. But Charlie is starting, all of the people he wants to have play dates with, shock horror, it's all the boys. He has never come home and said, I want, Lawrence to come for a play date. He never says that.
Yeah.
There's Isaac and James and Harry and literally every boy's name in the class, and Emrys and Ezra. I know all of the boys' names. I haven't got a flipping clue who the girls are in his nursery class, apart from, because we go to the parties, because everyone's hell-bent on having yearly birthday parties for everyone in the class. And the girls have princess pizza parties and it's all pink and the boys are not interested. No. They're literally not interested.
And that's okay. And some girls
nothing wrong with it. I'm saying there's
exactly, absolutely. Well, some girls and boys do have play dates with each other, but it's unusual. That's right. So there's some overlap. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm speaking as a tomboy. If I had grown up, if I had been me now in 2022, I would probably think that I was supposed to be a boy. I was a tomboy. I had boys that were friends. I wore jeans and I still wear jeans and freaking jumpers. All right, sometimes they've got flowers on them, but in the main, I'm a tomboy. I'm not trying to be a man. But if I grew up now, how I was then, I'd be really fucking confused with the narrative that's there. I mean,
yeah. So I think embracing single-sex spaces and allowing them to be, and allowing girls to be with girls, boys to be with boys, I think is important. Coming back to the initial, I digressed into sport there as a kind of example of where they've got this homogenization and this encouraging and expecting sameness from everybody is, in the name of equality, is kind of well-intentioned, but having lots of unintended negative consequences. That's my point. So in terms of initiation, I don't advocate doing something genuinely dangerous, because that's dangerous. But then there is a book. Yeah, I haven't read this book yet. I've read bits of it, but this is a book I've got called Raising Men by Eric Davis, who was a Navy SEAL sniper instructor. Yeah, I've read some of this, and this. In fact, each chapter is by a different Navy SEAL about their sons. You're writing that down, aren't you? So,
I'm writing it down so we can put it in the comments for anyone listening, so they can just find more.
So I will read that in due course. Now, these guys are all Navy SEALs, so that's about as elite as it gets. The things they're doing with their kids are stuff that I'm probably not going to do, right? That's some quite extreme stuff. They take them off into the middle of nowhere, because these guys are like those Maasai warriors. These guys can navigate their way around the desert and all this kind of stuff and find things to eat. And so they can do that with their kids in a way. But that's much more inspiring to me than this, because that's about proactively doing stuff to help boys connect with their channel their aggression, understand themselves as men, understand that they're going to be, boys are more aggressive than girls, right? Testosterone.
No, you don't say.
Well,
you're not allowed to say that, Kev.
Yeah, but you said testosterone is one hell of a fucking drug, right? And boys are more aggressive, especially as teenagers, right? So that's not bad or wrong. That's biology. Let's help them. If you don't let them channel it, if they're fatherless and the mother's just, you should be nice with it, and then the kid just goes off and finds a gang because and because that's the way he gets masculine input from gang leaders a couple of years older than him, and then you've got the unfathered blind leading the unfathered blind, then you're in fucking trouble, right? Whereas when you have a father figure, and that if single mums listening to this, if the dad's not around or he's passed away, get other men involved. It can be through your church, through sports teams, through obviously uncles, grandparents. Get other men involved with your daughters as well, but certainly with your sons. We're talking about boys today, so that they can do manly boy type stuff with them, and just take them out in the woods and chuck stuff around and not talk necessarily very much, but just do shit, and then just talk coincidentally when stuff comes up, rather than going out all well prepared with mummy, getting everything organised, right? So give them that opportunity. It's not bad that you can't provide it, but if you try and be the father to your son or your daughter, you won't. You will be you'll do great, but you won't be the father. In fact, there's another book. If I can just find this, I'll show it to you, because it just makes me have a reaction. Which my wife brought this book back from the charity shop, right? She saw this for like £1 in the thrift store, and she brought back this book because she knows this is an area I'm interested in, and I have quite a reaction. And the book is called Raising Boys Without Men: How Maverick Mums How Maverick Mums Are Creating the Next Generation of Exceptional Men. A strikingly fresh look at what makes boys go wrong, and right in our
fuck you, we don't need you, we can do it all by ourselves and do it better.
Well, she's an assistant professor of psychology in psychiatry at Cornell University, a former gender scholar. Oh dear, that's the giveaway. Gender scholar at Stanford University. So these are like top level universities in America. And she has a husband of 36 years. Okay, that's good. And 2 children, don't know if they're boys or girls, in 13 and 27. No, the teenager, the 13-year-old is a girl. Don't know about a 27-year-old. It's quite a gap. And it's a big cope, right? It's a big cope of how, basically we don't need dads around. And I think this fucking gets published. This is like I won't take it back to the charity shop because I don't want it to be back in circulation. I wouldn't want anybody else to read it. So the options are it stays on my shelf and I look at it and kind of use it as a teaching point, or it goes on the fire. Those are the 2 options, right? This is that messaging is out there, and
written by someone who's married still and brought up her children with a man. That's what gets me as well.
I don't know. It's really bizarre. And obviously she's not stupid. She's probably academically into it. But she was an academic in gender studies, which tends to mean a bit mad in my experience. Because, guess what? People who are men don't study gender studies, and people who are who embrace the masculine feminine dynamic and accept and see the masculine feminine dynamic in the way that we've been talking about, don't go and study gender studies, right? It's the people who've got some kind of issue with men and women being different and don't like it, or something, that they go and do gender studies. So expose your sons to men, obviously men you trust and all that kind of stuff. Obviously there are usual obvious caveats, but find men.
There are, but I think it's important to be explicit about them, because it's one of those, if we don't just say it, be straight about it, it's like, yes, safeguard your children. Yes, check out who you're allowing your children to be with and all that. I think it's important to, we kind of assume that people know that, but actually it's like, really do check it out. Make sure they're safe.
Yeah, well, it's great. And nothing in life is perfect, so you can't eliminate all risks.
You'll never eliminate risks.
But it's about connection and personal relationships obviously tend to count for a lot, because you trust people, that other people people you trust, who they trust, you much more easy if you trust them. And
something else that's very interesting that you said to me in the past, when we were talking about, I was like, come on then, Kev, when are you going to do this initiation stuff? What are you going to create? What are you going to do? Was that you said, and there can be no women, not even cleaning the rooms or preparing the food without being seen. There are no women allowed. And I was like,
we're talking about doing some sort of retreat weekend with where boys come at 12, 13, 14, something like that, with a male mentor, which could be their dad, uncle, who knows, but they come with basically a male sponsor
Yeah.
and doing something. And that might include not danger, but challenges. So, for example, a fire walk. So walking on hot coals is something that is one of my candidate possible activities to have to do, because that's going to fucking scare the shit out of them, right? Even though it's not really dangerous if you do it properly. Obviously, the intention is that you do it in such a way that it's not that dangerous, but it's a psychological challenge, to say the least. And there are other things you can do. Things most kids at that age have already done loads of abseiling and truss jumps and all that, boys and girls, because all schools are doing that at like. Primary schools are doing that for the 11-year-old kids. They all go away for a weekend at the end of year 6 and do that kind of stuff. My daughter's done it 2 or 3 times by that age. So that isn't going to cut it. It needs to be something. And the schools ain't doing firewalks. So firewalks is a different level thing. And they can create a pledge of, a sort of personal credo. So, for example, this book, we talked about Raising Men by Eric Davis, the Navy SEAL sniper instructor. And then there's also the books by Jocko Willink, who was also a Navy SEAL, and Way of the Warrior Kids. These are aimed at kids, boys, well, kids, but boys of 8, 9, 10, 11. Fantastic series of books. And he talks about, the SEAL code. And or the Marines have got their version, or the Ranger, they've all got their kind of like credo of, right, this is who we are, this is what we do. And maybe the boys make that as a group, or maybe they have individual ones, they make their own. And then they take it back with them and they make a pledge, they make a promise, they sign up to in front of the community, and they can obviously keep in touch afterwards as well, potentially, right? So there's all these things. And then you were saying, I know someone who could really help you with that. I think would be really good at helping organise it. And
that was it, yeah.
Oh, that's right. And they put me, and I thought,
shout out to Tanya. Yeah.
Oh, she's great. Hang on a minute, she's a woman. You can't go arrange an initiation thing in, I don't know, West Wales or whatever, in the mountains somewhere, initiating all these boys, and then have a woman cooking or organised or involved or admit, like, no, you can't have any of that, because it doesn't. No feminine energy allowed.
There'd be fluffy pillows and nice food and hot drinks on demand, and it would all be lovely.
We're ripping these motherfuckers out of their mother's hut in the middle of the night, right? So no cuddles allowed, right? So, but no. So yeah, it wouldn't be having the feminine presence. Obviously, would undermine the whole thing, right? And that's just the way it is. Just as when you have a retreat about dealing with menstruation and the spiritual side of menstruation and the symbolism of that and all that kind of stuff, you're not going to have blokes there, are you? That would be like fucking weird, right? What the fuck are you doing here talking about menstruation? Get out. Fair enough. So I haven't decided exactly what because I know of people. So Jocko Willink's Where the Warrior Kid is brilliant. There's another guy,
and his books for adults are brilliant. I mean, Extreme Leadership, and I listen to the podcast.
Extreme ownership.
Sorry, thank you. Extreme ownership. I mean,
the dichotomy of leadership. Yeah,
that's it. Thank you. His books gave me a whole world of there's how I thought the services and the Army and the Navy and the RAF are, and the American versions of them, and then there's how they actually work. And the leadership lessons that he brings and the way he talks is just brilliant.
Yeah, they're I think even within the Navy SEALs, which are a pretty elite organisation to say the least, he was he's
exceptional.
He's exceptional within that. So, but one of the reasons he's exceptional is because of extreme ownership, taking responsibility of everything, managing. Not actually taking responsibility for the people below you, but taking responsibility for the people above you, your boss, right? So managing up, but in a really, really, I'm responsible for everything.
But not in a way, it was when he was talking about, he wasn't directive. He let the guys own how they were going to do something. He'd tell them what the mission was and what the outcome was, and they would come up with how they were going to do it. And there was something for me in those books around, it was like, oh, that's really interesting, because my assumption, I don't know whether it's a lot of people's assumption, was, to be a great leader, you have to know the answer and you have to tell people what to do. And his books are basically the opposite of that, about allowing people to come up and own what they say they're going to do. And obviously he would go, maybe tweak that and there might be a problem there. And have you thought about this? But he didn't, it's not about him having all the answers.
It's not. We think of you could probably think of the military. I'm sure this was the case in some places. Sometimes where it's like top down. You do as you're told. Blah, 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 the grunts. Whereas it's like no, we're going to get everybody involved and draw on their own resourcefulness, because obviously the people on the ground know a lot. They have a lot to offer. So how can we tap into that and getting them to take ownership as well?
Yeah. So and then putting that into business, I just think it's brilliant.
I think Extreme Ownership is one of my top 6 books of all time. I recommend to anybody. I had a top 5 and it had to go in there, but then I couldn't take one out, so I've got a top 6 now. Another one which is relevant to our conversation, perhaps more relevant to our direct conversation today than Extreme Ownership, is The Way of the Superior Man by David Dada. So anyone who wants to understand the masculine feminine dynamic, I would strongly recommend The Way of the Superior Man by David Dada. Oh, but it's for men. Yes, it is for men. But every woman I've shown that book to has gone, oh my fucking God.
I've read it. I was like, this is brilliant. Now I understand myself.
There you go. Because it's all about understanding women, but also understanding men. It's the same fucking, you can't understand one without understanding the other, right? And a lot of it's, there's some quite woo-woo spiritual stuff in there, which I'm not so, into, but the core of it is a big.
Yeah, I've got a few of my male clients to read it, and they've come back to me going, there's some weird bits in there about sex. I'm like, don't worry about it, but just get to it.
So he talks, because the subtitle is Mastering the Challenges of Work, Women and Sexual Desire. Mastering the Challenges of Work, Women and Sexual Desire. And so he talks about semen retention in the sexual desire bit. So basically not ejaculating, all this kind of stuff. Obviously it's a tantric spiritual practice and all that kind of stuff. You don't need to get into that to take the value from the other stuff, right?
Absolutely.
That's probably what they're referring to. And if you want to get into that, knock yourself out. So that's the other one, which I think is if I think, what would Jocko Willink say? What would David Dada say about the boy crisis? I think they would have their solutions wouldn't be, we need more stay-at-home dads and encourage dads to do that. I think having dads be more emotionally intelligent, raising boys who are more emotionally intelligent is probably more important now than any time in the past for the reasons we just talked about. And girls have an advantage. Girls are doing better academically, and they have an advantage, inherent inbuilt advantage in the emotional intelligence stakes, the empathy and all that kind of stuff, the listening, the articulating emotion stuff. So that is why boys have got a particular challenge at the moment, and they can learn. It can be done, right?
Indeed. What a big subject. I'm just going to look at my notes for other things that I wanted to ask you about. I don't usually do notes for a podcast. I was like, it's a big book and a big subject. I've written down, what is men's place in the world? When, and I'll then add to that was my note, when, and we've kind of touched on this, and I still don't think we've completely answered it. And obviously it's a huge conversation. We'll never answer everything on a couple of hours podcast. When automated jobs are going, and there's these strange conversations about universal basic income, which worries the hell out of me, living in Wales, where we've had the benefit system for a long time, and what it's done to like 3 generations of people who now just rely on it and expect it and have no, general, obviously there's people it helps, and I think the benefit system's really powerful if used in the right way. I'm not saying it shouldn't be there. What do guys do, and how do we support them who aren't intellectual? And these like manual jobs are disappearing faster than anything. I mean, and they are going, but they're also being replaced, but then they're being replaced again. So if I think, if you look at now the number of vans and lorries and driving jobs, they just didn't exist before, but actually those are going to be automated out.
Yeah, they'll all be gone in 20 years.
They'll be gone. So although these new jobs have come up, they're going, they'll be gone. And yes, there are, I think what's really interesting being in the building industry, that you can't replace a gas engineer or electrical engineer, builders, but actually there are houses being built now where you bring in the 4 parts and everything's ready built and you just put them together. So even those there's a maintenance area that very difficult to replace. But what do guys do?
You give them vocational training.
Yeah.
Which is what you're talking. You help become plumbers and stuff like that.
Mm.
And that is because there's not a particularly academic intellectual area, right? So
it's not, although gas engineers and electrical engineers, electricians and gas engineers, they're being heavily legislated and they need a certain academic. Actually, now they do need a certain academic level.
Obviously there's levels of it, right? So somebody whose job at the moment is emptying, is sweeping the road or emptying dustbins, which obviously is an unskilled labour. They're not going to be able to do that. So that's another conversation. But someone, he talks in the book about Japan has set up a lot of vocational training system. And rather than trying to channel everyone into university, it's putting people into vocational training. And they have something like 99.2% of them get a job or something ridiculously, insanely high positive results. Wow. So I think more of that. I mean, I noticed, I had a debate with someone on Twitter yesterday about Sheffield Hallam University, which is probably, Sheffield used to be a polytechnic, right? Sheffield Hallam. So probably, I'm making this up, of the universities in the UK, it would probably be something between like number 50 and number 100, like not a particularly great university, right? I'm sure there's some things about it great. I don't want to diss it. Hey, minefield I'm walking into, but it's not one of the top universities, right? They've discontinued their degree in English literature. So they've basically paused. They're not going to have a degree in English literature because the government has said they won't fund, even though students pay, the government's still contributing some, right? Yeah. The government won't fund degrees that have, I think, something like more 2 years afterwards haven't got at least 40% of people in a certain level of income job or something. They're basically linking the degree to what actually jobs that people get, income people make afterwards. And the person I was responding to was saying, I have mixed feelings about this because education is not just about vocational stuff and all that kind of stuff. And my comment was, he wasn't the one I had the debate with. My comment was, English literature is one of the 10 worst paying graduate degrees. Right, there are tables on these things, which degrees, and I think the average for English literature after 5 years, the average salary is about £26,000. 5 years afterwards, right?
With all the debt as well now.
Plus you've got all the debt, right? But they're probably never going to pay off the debt because the way it works in this country, of course, you only pay it as an extra level of tax once you're earning over 36 grand or whatever it is. They're probably never going to pay off. Whereas if you have a degree in economics, which is the number one, then your starting salary, not 5 years later, your starting salary average is 36,000. So a degree in economics pays 10 grand a year more immediately rather than 5 years later, right? So it's like very different. Now, that's not to say that economics is better, but the point is the market is determining the value, right? That's what employers are paying. That's the value add. Now, it may also be the psychology of the people that go into it in the first place. So even if those people, none of them went to university, maybe the people who do economics would have a different mentality and mindset. They'd get more, pay more than people who have got a mindset approach to English literature. So it's not just about the degree to some extent, but there's some truth to it, right? That employers don't look at an English literature degree and think, oh, wow, you're going to be really good. They just think, what the fuck's the point of that, right? In general. And so it's like, well, actually, I'm in favour of them saying, no, let's have more vocational training. There's been this huge rush in the UK to expand universities ever since the Tony Blair, maybe 20 odd years ago. Yeah. Education. They want to go 50% of people go to universities. And so what you've got is this proliferation of people doing courses that really there's no demand for. And that's not good for those kids. And so if you're going to go to Oxford or Cambridge, it doesn't matter what the fuck you do because you'll get a high grade job, whatever you do. If you want to go into English literature at Oxford or Cambridge, that's fine. Because all anybody cares about is you went to Oxbridge, right? So if you're going to go to the really elite universities, you can do whatever you want. There's no problem. But if you're going to go and do just, I'll just go to university because everyone else says that I should and the teacher said I should and all my other mates are going, and then you just go to something kind of middle of the road to do a course you're not really that interested in, it's kind of nice, or I'm really, really passionate about it, but it's, fine art or whatever, chances are you're not going to get a return on your investment. And, that's not bad in itself, but the kids aren't going into that with open eyes. They're being told that going to university is really good and it's really going to set you up for life. And it ain't. It's going to mean you've pissed 3 years up the wall and got yourself into debt.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a false prospectus that kids are being sold. Now, the person that then started saying, arguing with me or debating this, was saying, well, are you saying it's okay for rich kids or upper class kids to do classics? And he's linked to classics at Oxford, but it's not okay for the plebs. I was like, no, I'm not saying that at all. Obviously, Oxford's different. If you go to plebs, I said basically plebs can get into Oxford, but they don't apply, right? So it's his word, plebs. He was kind of perpetuating this idea, therefore, that Oxford is only for rich kids. It's not true. The reason that very few poor kids get into Oxford is because they don't apply. They are encouraged. Oxford encourages them to apply, but their teachers and their families, and they say, "Oh, you'll never get into there. It's not for the likes of you," and they don't apply. But they do
no expectations.
Which this guy is perpetuating by saying this. Now, what was so funny about this? Well, this guy doesn't understand supply and demands, right? So it's not about one degree is better than the other. It's about the market is paying more for this degree than the other. So therefore, that should be important, and it should be particularly important to working class kids who haven't got a trust fund to fall back on because they're the ones that need to be making some money. Right, so actually putting them into a degree that doesn't pay them well, and then he's also perpetuating this idea that Oxford's just for rich kids. What's going on? I don't understand it. This guy's job is professor of economics, and I was like, "What the fuck? He's a professor of economics at university, and he didn't understand supply." I thought, "Oh God, this is my brain is getting fried." Why am I telling this story? How do we get into this? Because
I said, what do boys do?
Vocational training, right? If you send your son to do English literature at Sheffield Hallam, which doesn't exist anymore, or the equivalent, or to study any of these really badly paid, because this guy, what he seemed to care about was the kind of enriching experience of education, right? And how education just really enriches the soul, which is valid. And I said, yes, education as a form of basically recreation is valid as well, but that's not the prospectus that we're selling to working class 18-year-olds. That's not why they're going to university. I mean, this guy's a professor at Birkbeck, right? So the students are mature students. Birkbeck is 100% full, a part-time college. It's an evening college, a part-time part of the University of London. High standard, but it's all part-time. It's always been part-time. My great aunt did her degree there during the war, as it happens. So he said, "Oh, most of my students are, in their 30s and they're doing something they couldn't do before. They're making up for something they missed out on," which is all fine, right? But they're doing economics. They're not doing. This is what I couldn't understand. And I had to Google him to find out where he was because it wasn't on his profile. But and it's like this kind of attachment to liberal arts education. It's kind of good for the soul to study these things and get a degree, and degrees are good. It's like, well, are they? Because they're not preparing kids for the real world. If you're going to elite university, like my daughter's going to one of the top, she's going to do maths, right, which is one of the things that's really in demand, and she's going to do it at one of the top 20 maths university departments in the world, right? It's number 4 in the UK, one of the top 20. Some people would say it's better than Oxbridge, but anyway, it's number 4 in the UK officially at Warwick. And so she'll fucking walk into, she wants to go and work in the city or insurance or something, or some high-paying financial thing. She'll walk into it. They'll be fighting over her, right? So there's going to get a big ROI on that. But if you're going to go and do something Mickey Mouse at a Mickey Mouse University, you're not doing the kids any favour. So set up vocational training. Now that applies to, obviously these are fairly academic kids because they could go to university at all. And maybe some kids, obviously, probably 50% of kids aren't going to even have that option. But they can still do the vocational training. There needs to be more vocational training. And that is what's going to help.
Yeah.
And that, Japan's doing it. Why aren't we?
And then we're back full circle to where we started with, dealing with like our children and our small community. But actually the wider problem is, all right, more vocational training. Shit, it's not there. And that, and it's a push and pull, isn't it, between what we get involved in and, where we get involved and how we get involved and all the rest of it.
Well, yeah, it is, but I'd be surprised if my son, he's not going to. I doubt he'll be doing vocational training because I suspect he will get into one of the elite universities if he wants to, because his mum's a doctor.
He wants to.
Yeah.
But if he doesn't want to.
Well, actually, so he would have that option, but then if he doesn't want to, I mean, he could. Yeah, I mean, what you're saying is true. In that, and there's again often in the, plumbers, for example, make a lot of money, even if they're just self-employed. If they start a business and employ other plumbers, they make a fucking lot of money. And of course, the average person with their English literature degrees working as a barista in Starbucks looks down on the plumber as, oh, that's a bit low status. They're making 5 times what you're making, mate. But you know, so it's all about status and psychology.
Yeah.
What seemed to be, oh, this is high status. But if my son wants to be a plumber, that's totally cool. I suspect that's not what he's going to grow up with parents who went to top universities and have benefited from that and valued that, but also will warn him, you know, university isn't the be all and end all. You make your own choices. But because of the social circles he's moving, the school he's going to go to, whatever.
And the expectations around him about what's possible actually changes everything, doesn't it?
What's possible, yeah. So I will be, my daughter, we didn't get into a conversation really about going to Oxford until it was like 3 months before the time to apply and take an exam, a maths exam to get in there. So it was too late. If she'd have got inspired by it a year before and really worked towards it, she could have probably have got in there. But it was too late to try and do the exam. And I think prior she'd been kind of scared of the idea, and there was COVID and everything. Once we then met up with my friend who went to Cambridge, who's a Cambridge graduate who she knows well, who used to live together, who's one of my tenants, and we had a big conversation. She got enthused, and we went and visited Oxford and visited Cambridge. She got enthused, but it was too late. And I still, it would have been great to go because it is another like level of exposure to rich experience. And you go anywhere around the world and you say, oh, I went to Oxford, I went to Cambridge, and people go, wow, people are really, really impressed. I'm not saying they should be, but they are. The brand value of it is so huge that it will just open doors. And even in terms of, obviously it doesn't matter if you're going to do property development, but it kind of does, because it's still, people will take you more seriously when they learn that fact about it.
I think Owen talks about it really, he put it very succinctly. Our kids are in private school. We've built wealth to afford it. We've got investments that pay for it. And he said it so simply one day. He went, it doesn't matter what our kids do, but because they've been to private school, playing with kids that have got the next wealth level up. And he used the example of the mortgage broker. He went, if our kids are mortgage brokers, they're going to be mortgage brokering houses that are worth $500,000, $1.5 million, $2 million. If they go to standard school, whatever you want to call it, and they're mortgage brokers, they'll be doing houses that are 50,000, 100,000, 150,000. And that's, on a networking level, even if they choose the same career, they're just dealing with a higher net worth. So there's a networking.
Absolutely. It's partly, you say networking, so it's partly about connections and all that stuff. Yeah. But it's also just about your map of reality and what you're aware of. Yeah. Right. So the classic thing about people criticise politicians in this country, like Boris Johnson, David Cameron, people who went to Eton and then went to Oxford or Cambridge and then go to the House of Commons. And for them, there's no jump, because the House of Commons is this really old, grand Victorian building, really intimidating kind of institution. And so is Oxford. And so is Eton. So they're just completely, just take it in their stride. It's totally normal to them, right? And that's, a form of privilege and all that. But it's also, Boris Johnson got a scholarship to Eton. He didn't pay. I don't know, maybe his dad paid a bit, but he got in because he was very clever. And if my son were to get a scholarship to Eton and it was paid, I would fucking send him there in a heartbeat, because it's a really great, it's a bit too woke, actually, some aspects of it for me at the moment, but, it's a really great education. They have speakers, they have prime ministers and former prime ministers and industry leaders and Nobel Prize laureates come and speak at their after-school clubs. So why wouldn't you want your kid to be exposed to that? Because that's going to expand their So in terms of the mortgage broker thing, it's partly about connections. It's partly just about expanding what your idea of possibility is. Because one of my clients, remember him talking to me, it was in his late 20s, and he talked to me about how he got a job after university in some kind of venture capital firm. And now he works in the family business, which was building and running hotels. They was converting buildings to hotels and running them across Europe, right? But he talked about how being a couple of years at that place where they were dealing with money and financing of business deals and opened his eyes to a whole other world. So when you're in that environment, and I would certainly support my daughter in getting into that for a bit, because then when you see people doing deals of tens or hundreds of millions, and you see the commissions that are made on those kind of deals, then your whole kind of thermostat about what reality is around money is shifted, isn't it? And you just think, well, yeah, a couple of $100,000 a year. I once had a client of mine who was a property developer, and he came to me because he was struggling with something psychological. And his words to me were, I could, with this current psychology that I'm dealing with, I could rub along making like $1 million a year, but that's not good enough. That's shit. I want to get back to doing the really big deals like I used to do. So his reality of what was normal and what was acceptable, his standards were very, very much higher than most people, right? Yeah. So, if you when you expose your kids to those kind of people and that kind of thinking, they're going to think differently than if they weren't exposed to that. So that's one of the things that's great about private education as well. And your kids are all exposed to that, because if you send your kids to a normal school, a state school, they're still exposed to they've got two parents that have independently built property portfolios that will pay them enough passive income. They don't need to work. So that's normal for your boys. Right. So again, that's just like, oh yeah, mum and dad both did that, didn't they? They had a load of houses. That's not something it's not going to go, what? You own a house and you rent it out? Oh, isn't that really bad? Well, aren't landlords really greedy, nasty people? I read about in the paper. They're not going to have that bullshit in their head, are they? Because it's all just normal to them, and they've seen that you're not like that.
Kevin, we've been going for 2 hours and 20 minutes.
Who would have thought? Who could have anticipated that?
Who knew we could talk this long about one subject started by one book? Who knew? Any final thoughts for people listening to this? Top tip, takeaway, biggest, what's the most important thing out of everything we're talking about? Because we talked about a lot. It's a big subject.
Can I have two? One is embrace the masculine and feminine and see that men and women are different, but we're on the same team. And so it's great that we're different. And have your kids see that. Boys and girls, that's so important, because if you go through life not getting that, you're going to find life so confusing and frustrating, I think, and many people do, because they don't understand that. They don't understand humans, they don't understand themselves, they don't understand the people they fall in love with, and it makes all sorts of chaos. And I actually think that, yes, this is all about the purpose void or helping kids find purpose, but I actually think with the number one thing, and again, this applies to boys and girls, is curate what they're exposed to. So the storybooks that my son reads when he's a year and a half, 2 years old, some of them I will reject. The storybooks he reads when he's 5, the shit the teachers try and get him to look at school, I will curate and I will keep an eye on it. The movies he's exposed to, the messages that he sees, I will be curating that. And when obviously he's going to see stuff that I don't want him to see, and he's going to see negative stuff about boys. But I will challenge that with him. I will explain to him why it's bullshit. I mean, some people, and with young kids, you do it in a jokey way. You're like, do you know what? Some people think that all girls are better than all boys, or boys are bad just because they're boys. Isn't that a really weird idea that some people have got? And the kid at the age of 7 or 8 will go, oh, that's crazy, and laugh along with daddy at how mad some people are. But the point is, then the idea that men are bad, boys are bad, has been put in his head as a joke, daft, ridiculous idea, so that when he hears it, he will already be inoculated against it and just think, oh, fucking load of nonsense. And so I've done similar things with my daughter. I think I may have said to you before about transgenderism and the kind of ideology spreading, so that when she was about 10, it started really kicking off and being everywhere. What the fuck is that? Oh, she's going to hear about this. I don't want her to hear about this, because I don't want her to be thinking about this sort of nonsense. I don't want it getting in her head, but she's going to hear about it. So I've got to get in there first. So I remember sitting at the dinner table once saying, Imogen, there are some boys who think they're girls. Oh, isn't that weird? And there are some girls who think they're boys, isn't there? And she was like, what? That's mad. And laughing about it. Not because I want her to become transphobic. She's not transphobic. She's not against. It's like she's not going to be nasty to anybody. My God. But because I didn't want her to start doubting her own am I a girl or maybe I'm a boy? That's the toxic bit, right? So you inoculate them by talking about the idea of that they're going to get exposed to, and making a joke of it and how absurd it is. Because when they've heard it from you and they've laughed at it and you created fun feelings of how ridiculousness and absurdity, that's the association they've got. And then when they're, inoculation is the word, when they're then exposed to it, they're already protected against that way of thinking. So when people take their kids, like is happening at the moment in Pride Month, they take their kids to Pride shows with people naked, gyrating on floats and being hypersexual, as some people do in Pride shows, or drag queens being hypersexual on these, and they take their kids to that at the age of 5 or 6, as some people do. I think that's an incredibly bad mistake, right? Because you're getting your kids exposed to these.
You're normalizing that.
You're normalizing hypersexualization. It's not about sexual orientation. It's about you're normalizing hypersexualization in the kid's head at an early age. Disaster. You want to be in the opposite of that. You want to be protecting them from those ideas. And then when you know they're going to be exposed to it at some point, you say some people, grown-ups are really, really weird and they dress up in these strange things. It's kind of crazy, isn't it? So they don't then get affected when they hear it. Similarly with money, when I was teaching my daughter about money, I would say to her, because I knew she was going to hear negative stuff about money, I said, some people think money's bad. They think rich people are bad, isn't it? And she'd laugh. And then I remember once when one of her friends had some change, she didn't want, I don't want this change, I don't want this change. Imogen, who wants it? Who wants it? And he was like, I'll have it. Because I told her about this idea. Some people feel uncomfortable with money and they want to get rid of it. And then you just say, yes, please. And you let them have it. And she came back and said, I got Chloe's money. Chloe didn't want it. She gave it to me. Right? Yeah, that's my girl.
Yeah.
So the principle of inoculation.
Yeah. And that point comes back to your first point about learning and understanding about masculine and feminine. Actually, when we talk about that, when the transgender conversation comes up, which is so rife at the moment and so confusing to young teenagers, we can talk about it in terms of masculine and feminine. And
100%.
Like when I was a kid, I was a tomboy, but it didn't mean I was a boy. It's normal to have masculine and feminine, and it doesn't mean you have to change yourself into something.
100%.
100%. Brilliant.
Exactly. When you understand the masculine and feminine, how we've all got both, but in different ratios, and some women are more masculine than feminine. So maybe tomboy Alex as a teenager or a butch lesbian, whatever, doesn't mean they're a man. It just means they're a butch lesbian or a tomboy Alex teenager, right? And similarly, if I'm a very feminine, gay, submissive man, that doesn't mean I'm a woman. It means I'm a gay, submissive.
And there's nothing wrong with being that
nothing
way.
Nothing wrong with that. Right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, and this is one of the reasons why actually there's quite a movement amongst butch lesbians are really pissed off about the transgender messaging, because they feel like they're trying to erase butch lesbians. And we would all be told when we were kids we'd have been bloody put on a path to transition. Fuck off. Oh, and you want to have people with penises in female-only spaces, which lesbians tend to be quite keen on female-only spaces, right? They're quite protective of that. So this is, the LGBT community is not one community. There's lots of very different views within it, and it's not as simple as just let's be nice to everybody and let everybody. It's not about the people. It's about the ideology and the thinking. So yes, the whole masculine and feminine thing will tend to inoculate them against that as well.
And in a way that doesn't make anyone wrong. It doesn't mean that if you're this way, it's bad. It's like everything is okay. And it doesn't mean you have to start changing yourself. And if you get older and you're still having these feelings and you've had all conversations and all the rest of it, fine. But
since we talked about this last time, I've done a bit more reading about it. And there's 3 different types of gender dysphoria. And one of them is in very young children, so they might be 3 or 4. They might start saying it.
Yeah,
now, the vast majority of those kids will grow out of it if you don't socially transition them. But if you socially transition them, you do the thing that is being promoted now of going, "Oh, you think you're a girl, do you?" This, my kid says 4 years old. Oh, you think, okay, well, let's let you wear dresses and change your name. That actually consolidates it and makes it persist. Which there's nothing wrong with being transgender, and you can have sex change surgery if you really fucking wants to, but it's not the path I would recommend. That's not the easiest path. Much easier path is when they are doing that stuff at that age, you just don't take it seriously and you don't let them cross-dress. You don't socially transition them, and then they just grow out of it, which obviously is much simpler than bloody trying to transition. And then there's different ones. Teenagers amongst girls, typically it's teenagers. It's a totally different thing. And then men, it tends to be adult men. It's again, so there are three very different forms of gender dysphoria, and dealing with differently. And that all gets lost in the nuance does not survive very long in that conversation. But yeah, embracing the masculine feminine, understanding that so it's not about there's nothing wrong with being a butch lesbian, there's nothing wrong with being an effeminate gay man, there's nothing wrong with having transition as the way of resolving your gender dysphoria, and that will be right for some people. But there's something, in my view, in my opinion, there's something wrong with encouraging people down a path of gender dysphoria, or encouraging children to think that that's something that is an option that's open to them, and kind of putting that in their head at a young age.
At a very young age. That's the thing for me.
Very fucking wrong with that.
Yeah. Just like I wouldn't encourage my kids to drink alcohol. They're not allowed to vote to a certain age. They're not allowed to smoke to a certain age. And yet we go, oh yeah, start fucking around with that when your hormones are all over the shop and you haven't got a clue which way is up and you're not really sure who you are and life's really confronting. And for me, it's a funny one when there are clear things that we don't let children do and we protect children from, and we say to children, the world is this way. And then with this subject,
it's a lack of boundaries. One of the things that runs through it all is the lack of, obviously the most fundamental boundary in human existence, the boundary between men and women, male, female, is like, that's a boundary, right? So it's about lack of boundaries, wanting to break down the boundaries, and it becomes a political thing because people in the kind of liberation politics movement who want to liberate, everything's about oppression. So in Marxist perspective, you want to liberate people, and they want to smash the boundaries, smash the patriarchy, smash heteronormativity, they want to just break boundaries down. And you haven't got fucking boundaries for your kids. That's your problem, their problem. But my kids are going to have boundaries because kids need boundaries. So back off.
What a good place to end. Don't fuck with Kevin's kids, people. He won't have it. And it's great. And I think it's I want to thank you for speaking it out loud on a podcast where, potentially you could get a lot of backlash for it. I think that's the thing, is about having these conversations out in the open. It's one of the reasons I love doing a podcast. And if people listen, it's like, amazing. Thank you for listening, and the time and the attention, all the rest of it. It's like actually having the conversations out there, not, when you come over to dinner and we have these conversations, but we never share it out there in the world. So then other people who are thinking it don't get to go, oh God, I thought it was just me. I thought I was some weird, archaic, patriarchal, monster having these feelings about boundaries and about men and women and about all the rest of it. So, thank you for carrying the torch of this conversation, because it's not said enough.
Yeah, thank you. And bear in mind also, with the recent, when we talk about women's space and women's sport, the recent decision by the international swimming body to not allow trans women, so male to female transsexuals, to compete in women's swimming if they've gone through any degree of male puberty. One of the people who supports that completely is Caitlyn Jenner, who is the most famous transgender person in the fucking world, and as a man won a gold medal at the Olympics in the decathlon, which is probably arguably the most challenging interdisciplinary track and field event, as Bruce Jenner. So this person knows a bit about sport and athletics. This person knows what it's like to transition from living as a man to living as a woman. This person is not transphobic, and he's like, yes, good. This was fucking obviously the sensible thing to do. But if you say it as a straight white man, then you're a whatever. But Caitlyn
you're
says
see you next Tuesday. That's what you are, Kev.
Caitlyn says it, but that's okay. So, but if you this is the other thing. Engage with the ideas and not the person, or if you assume things about people's political views or what they should or shouldn't think based on their sex, their sexual orientation, or their race, you're a fucking idiot. Or you're being an idiot, let's put it that way. You're being idiotic, let's put it that way. Soften it, right? That's idiotic. People think different. It's not about, I'm going to think a certain way because of my sex, or because of my age, or because of my colour of my skin. So that is actually racist as well as stupid as well. Anyway, I've said enough.
Well, and the only way out of this polarising situations that we're in at the moment is to be able to have these conversations and to be able to sit down and go, well, how is it for me? How is it for you? What actually is going on? What's it like being a parent? What was it like for you, Alexlouise, as a person who had a business who then had children? And me be able to say that and that be okay. It's like, if we don't have these conversations, I mean,
which is, and that's why nowadays, bizarrely, in politics, it's the right to are more in favour of free speech than the left. I mean, 30 years ago, it was the other way round, right? Because change happens and progress happens. The only way bad ideas are taken down and good ideas progress is by people able to express and develop and talk about their ideas. So what is it now that the left is against that, right? Because they're becoming authoritarianism. And it's like, if we don't have freedom, most people, again, apparently Generation Z survey saw recently, they were asked, what's more important, not offending people or people not being offended, or freedom of speech? And amongst Generation Z, they had fucking not offending people is more important than freedom of speech. That's worrying. Hopefully they'll grow up, but will they?
And that is a theme for another podcast, Kevin.
It could be.
Awesome. Thank you very much, as always, for your time, your thoughts, your sharing, your eloquent way of putting things, giving people some freedom to go, oh, thank God, I'm not a weirdo. It's okay to feel like a woman or feel like a man or whatever it is. Thank you for your expertise. If anyone wants to find you, they can find you in the links wherever they're listening to this. If you're watching on YouTube, you can listen to it on podcast platforms, so you can take us with you wherever you're going without having to, have it just on YouTube. Kevin, people can come and find you if they want to seek you out. If anyone is interested in what Kevin said about initiation for boys with a father or sponsor, please get in touch with Kevin and join me on the bandwagon of getting Kevin to do this as a thing. It's really important. So I implore you to message either myself or Kevin or both saying, I think that's a great idea. How do I get involved? I've got boys and I want them to have something that currently doesn't exist. And we will no doubt speak again in the next few months. Thanks again.
All right. Look forward to it. Thanks, Alex. Bye.
Bye, everybody.